the Ahankara business, but that's okay. Good evening. And okay, Upanishads, essentially, they're not the very oldest Sanskrit text. So just say a few words, and then we'll dive straight in. The oldest Sanskrit text, Sanskrit is an Indo-European language, and it has the oldest literature in this huge language family called, nowadays we call it Indo-European, because we don't know what else to call it. They used to call it Aryan, but that obviously took the wrong turn somewhere in early 20th century German ideology. But actually Aryan is a good thing in the Gita, in Sanskrit. And Aryan is a cultured and learned and righteous person. So we now call it Indo-European. It's a language family, and Vedic is the oldest form of that. And then classical Sanskrit is a slightly later form of Vedic is archaic, has some archaic forms. So the oldest literatures then are the Vedas. And then there are essentially a four strata of literature, and in what we, if we want to be quite accurate and precise, what we call a Vedic corpus. Of course, people use the term Vedic very loosely, and they just use it for everything. The old word's Vedic, everything's Vedic, Vedic mathematics, Vedic this, Vedic that. Then that's fine, that's popular usage. But strictly speaking, both in the tradition and amongst academic scholars, but also in the tradition, Vedic actually only refers to the older period, and it has four genres of literature in the Vedic corpus, and the oldest of the four Vedas. And then you have a genre of literature called Brahmanas, and notice our first, they're called Brahmanas. Brahmanas are both a caste, the priestly caste, but they're also the name of a genre of text. So actually the Brahmanas are those who teach and study and enact the Brahmana texts. You can think of it that way too. William, was that you who sent me an email and you couldn't get in? You got in. So that's the second, and they're ritualistic texts. The Vedas are hymns to the celestial beings, cognate with the Greco-Roman gods. Even some of the names, we can almost see some of the remnants of the old names, like Zeus Pater, which is Jupiter, is Dyaus Pater in Sanskrit. So not only the language is connected, but we get bits and pieces even of the culture that was once in primordial times, way before nothing recorded, before literature, before inscriptions. We can only try to reconstruct it. So that's the Vedas, and the Brahmanas are prose texts, huge body of manuals describing the protocols for performing the rites, the fire sacrifices, what to throw in, what kind of sacrifices to perform, when, where does everybody sit, what hymns are chanted at what point in the sacrifice, how do you line up the meticulous, nothing like it in the ancient world. A lot of them not really of much interest, certainly not of much interest to yogis, because they're all connected with that, the whys and wherefores of the ritual, the actual rite. Then we have a genre of text called the Aranyakas. Notice our first Upanishad is the Bṛhadāraṇyaka. And that doesn't have a definite nature of its own. It has a little bit of the older Brahmana type of material. And then the fourth strata of the Upanishads, which is our topic. So four strata of in the Vedic corpus, also called the Shruti, that which was heard. Okay, because it's considered to be, these texts are considered to be eternal, and depending on the school, either they're just eternal, period. The ritualists, the Mimamsas say these texts are eternal, that's it. They're not even spoken by God. In fact, the Mimamsas don't even accept God. They just said we have an eternal Veda, and we should accept it because for the well-being of the cosmos, and the Veda says do ritual, therefore we should do ritual. So one of the six schools, you've heard of the six schools of Indian philosophy, were the Mimamsa. And they were actually very powerful philosophers. And the theistic traditions which believe in cyclical creation, that there's creation, lasts, 14 billion years, and then there's dissolution and a period of latency, and then creation starts again. And Ishvara, of course, is eternal. It's not subject to the cyclical creativity, the eternal being. And Ishvara presents and articulates the Vedas at the beginning of each cycle. So either way, Whether you want to say Ishvara articulates them, or you say they're eternal, clearly the point is these are not sort of man-made and therefore subject to the imperfections of humans. And they're even called aparushaya, not human. Because if even if you're a rishi or enlightened being, well, you can make a mistake. So you really want, for your sacred text to be really sacred, and no different from Christianity, the Son of God, New Testament, right? Quran, right? Archangel Gabriel speaks it in the ear of Prophet Muhammad. So that what's the same? Seems to be the same principle, that to follow something so absolutely, that thing had better be perfect. Well, how is it going to be perfect if it comes out of some mortal person or someone speaks? Say, well, everyone's imperfect. Even the rishis are subject to defects of the senses, subject to making erroneous inferences. So you want it to be absolutely perfect. If you're going to if it's going to be the anchor to your whole culture. And so either way, whether you want to say the Vedas are eternal, or you want to say that God articulate, the point is these four strata in traditional Hinduism are considered to be, they're the anchor, the rock, they are the aparushaya, not being uttered by any human. Okay, so and in that corpus, the Vedic corpus, the Shruti, that which is shru is to hear. Shruti is that which is heard. So in that corpus, the four Vedas are the oldest strata. They're beautiful hymns to the celestials, to Indra, the god of rain, to Agni, the god of fire, asking for stuff. Nothing spiritual about the Vedas. Nothing spiritual at all. Very earthy. Very, very. Just give me this, give me that. Oh, Indra, I am your worshipper. I have performed sacrifices. Get to. Give me something. Give me rain. Give me victory over my enemies. It's quite, very materialistic. Vedanta takes a turn away from that. Even the Gita in the second chapter critiques the Vedic rituals without rejecting it. Can't reject it because it's sacred text. Okay, Vedas, four Vedas. Then we have this Brahmana strata, which are the actual manuals, and Vedas are in meter and poetry. At least three of them are. And then you have the Brahmana ritual text, which are the details, like in the old days when you bought a computer, when they first came out, do you remember? Some of us remember, great big huge manual. Nobody ever read it except computer nerds, right? So they were Brahmin nerds back then, and they knew all the details of how to perform a ritual. Great big massive tomes. They're the Brahmanas. Where do you sit? How many different castes, which different lineages, right? So this lineage chants the Samaveda at this point of the sacrifice, and this other lineage is responsible for the Rig Veda, and highly meticulously intricate, inconceivably so. Not like Greco-Roman where just get bull, cut it, cut it open, pull out the entrails, and not like that. Extremely, extraordinarily complex. And then you have the genre. So then we have a third genre. I'm just going to skip that for a minute. And then you have the fourth genre, the Upanishad, which where we find the beginnings of philosophy, of speculation, of everything that comes to be known as Hinduism. If it's going to be Orthodox Hinduism, has to find its roots in the Upanishads. Somehow or other, has to find one little peg upon which to hang the whole tradition on. Whether you're a Tantrika, a Vaishnava, a Shaiva, a Krishna Bhakta, there's no Krishna, there's no Tantra, there's no Kundalini in the Upanishads. But you have to find one little line, one little maybe hidden reference and say, oh, this is it's just in seed form. And our later tradition is going to, take the seed and bring it to full fruition. That's basically one of the ways of, you can't make stuff up. Even Guruji Iyengar, what do you think you're reading the Yoga Sutras for? But it's got 3 verses on asana. You got to make stuff up. You got to have you got to find a peg in the tradition. Otherwise, you're not traditional. Then you go off like the Buddha and do your own thing. Fine, we can do that, but then you're not Vedic anymore. So Vedas, Brahmana texts, Upanishads, and the third one is the Aranyaka, which doesn't have a clearly defined ethos of its own. It has sort of Brahmana-like material and Upanishad-like material, so it doesn't have a defining, distinctive quality of its own. And we're now going to engage the Upanishads as the fourth strata. And they're divided. So the 4 Vedas, each Veda has its Brahmana and Aranyaka and Upanishad. So if you're a Brahmana in ancient India, you wouldn't necessarily read everything. you would be responsible for the Veda of your lineage and the Brahmana text associated with that, and the Aranyaka text, and so if you look at Olivel, if you go to page, you've all got, those of you that have Olivel, go to page 3, and then you say, and you see the Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upanishad, the first one, the oldest one, constitutes the concluding section of the voluminous Satapatha Brahmana, the Brahmana of the white Yajurveda. So the Yajurveda, one of the 4 Vedas, and then that's subdivided into white and black. And each of these lineages has a certain, or more, maybe one or more than one Brahmana, and then at least one or more Aranyakas and one or more Upanishad associated with that lineage. Okay, and in this way, there were 10 Brahmin families, and these traditions were handed down in that way. This is all historical stuff. Let me just say, we're going to be reading these texts as yogis. Okay, I'm not a historian. I'm primarily a yogi. I came to academia many years after, being deeply embedded in yogic practice. So we're not going to be looking at this in terms of, I'm just throwing that out. Okay, there's different ways of reading these texts, and we're going to be reading them from the lens of yoga and Vedanta. Okay, there's so many ways of reading it. Some scholars read it through a Marxist lens. They don't see yoga and Vedanta. They just see power and jostling for power. They see the debates between the priests and this is actually a political contest. And then, that's a Marxist way of thinking about it, right? Religion is produced by those who control the means of production. So you can read it through a Marxist lens, so many different feminist lens, so many lenses, and they're all insightful in their own way, according to what they set out to do. And we're going to set out to read this through a lens of yoga, using primarily Patanjali. Okay, so I'm assuming most of you, and the Gita, because the Yoga Sutras and the Gita become our canonical texts in the West as yoga practitioners. The 2 texts out of so many texts in India, people are you're not reading the Vedanta Sutras, are you? Most of you, with the commentaries of Shankara and Ramanuja. What are people reading? Well, tend to be reading the Gita. I'm not. Obviously, some of you are reading other things as well, but I think we can agree that the 2 primary texts that have attained the state of canon, like the Bible for Christians and the Quran for the canonical text for Western yoga, whether we think of it this way or not, but de facto, in actuality, the canonical texts have become the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. The great teachers that came in the 60s brought these texts and translated them, and made them part of their ashram and part of their central to their teachings. Okay, so we're going to be looking at this through the lens of yogis. Okay. Right, so that's it. That's all I'm going to say about the Upanishads. Now we're going to do 2 straight hours of Svadhyaya, and then I'll linger for questions. So you're going to get 2 solid hours of Svadhyaya. It's about a good period of time. It's no different than 2 hours of asana. We're doing an asana workshop, 2 hours. For some of us, that's goes on forever. 2 hours, oh my God, when's it going to end? Maybe some of you will be like that for Svadhyaya, but hang in there. So and then we'll have questions. And then we'll have a kirtan, and of course you're all welcome. You can stay or not for the kirtan. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about background. If you have questions about the background, you can bring them in so no questions. I'm not reading chat. Don't write anything in chat. I'm focusing on the Shastra, on the text. If you have a question, please save it for 8 o'clock. Right, now, before we start reading the Upanishads, I'm going to say one thing, and then that's it. The rest of the workshop, we've got 6 sessions. If we want, we can have if we don't get if we don't cover what we want to cover, if we're really enjoying it, if you really want to, I don't mind adding a 7th or an 8th. We'll deal with that when we get to the 6th, when we get to the end. But one more thing, and the Upanishads are chronological in Olivel. Now, how do we know they're chronological? Obviously, Hindu wouldn't think of them as chronological. Because if you think they're eternal texts, then that means they're not chronological. And chronological means they emerge at different rishis or sages articulate them. But if you're real traditional Hindu, that either you believe they're eternal or you believe Ishvara bestows the Vedic corpus at the beginning of every cycle. There's no chronology for you. But why do academic scholars say that? There is a chronology because of the language. So the oldest one, the Brihad, has archaic Vedic forms that are not present in the, let's say, the Shvetashvatara, the later Upanishads, where the Sanskrit becomes much more like classical Sanskrit. So linguist is not going to be able to say they all were written at the same time, because the language. If you had Beowulf, English Beowulf, which is basically German, Anglo-Saxon, and then you had Chaucer, and then you had Shakespeare, and then you had some, 20th century, I don't know, late 19th century philosopher, and then you had modern New York Times. You can't say that. You could say it's English, but it's not. Clearly, you're not written at the same time because the language forms are different. Archaic forms fall into disuse, and new forms emerge. So it's not like that with the Vedic corpus. So if you're a linguist, you're not going to be able to accept the idea that they're eternal. But if you're a traditional Hindu, they are. We don't care about those issues because we're not reading these as historians. Okay. So that's all I have to say about the little bit of background. The traditional meaning of the word Upanishad. There's upa and then ni and then shad. So shad is the word, is the verb, the dhatu, the Sanskrit verb. And upa and ni are prefixes. So come down, sit. Come and sit down. So it conjures up this wonderful image of the sage in the forest, and then the student is inquiring as to truth about Ātman. Is there life after death? Is there something that survives death? Ask the basic existential questions, and you can envision, you can create a nice romantic imagery of the sage saying, come and sit down, come my son, come and sit down. It's very lovely. Upanishad. You approach, all you need is humility to approach the teacher. A real teacher will teach anyone that's sincere. And sincerity means humility. Humility means you want to listen. If you're arrogant, you don't want to listen. You want to project your own ego. So Upanishad means come, down, sit. Upa, near, come. Ni, down. Shad, sit. So, but Oliver prefers to translate it as connections. I don't think many people agree with that, but it doesn't matter for us. We'll go with the traditional way. Come and sit down. That's the meaning of this word Upanishad. All right. Now we're just going to take 2 verses from the Yoga Sutra as our springboard into the Upanishads. The first 2 sutras. Those of you familiar with the Yoga Sutras will know the first sutra is Atta, now, Yoga Anushasanam. Now there's going to be the Anu. That's another prefix, like Upa, Ni. These are prefixes. You know what a prefix is. You put it before the very word prefix. You got pre, and then you got the verb is fix. And then you put pre in front of it. So you could say prefix, preconfigure, predetermine. So the verb pre itself is a prefix. So in Sanskrit, we have these prefixes. They're called upasargas. So we just had 2, ni, upa, and ni. Well, anushasanam is in the first sutra of yoga. Anu is to continue, and that's another prefix. And it means to continue whatever the verb is. So continue the teaching. So in the first sutra, Patanjali is not claiming to be giving you knowledge of something that he's discovered like the Buddha does. Buddha claims he's sitting under the Bodhi tree and the 4 watches of the night, and he has his 4 or is it 3, I can't remember, 4 realizations, and he comes out and he has his first sermon in the Deer Park, the so-called Deer Park. So he's claiming to have stumbled upon, or rather, discovered a deep truth that no one else has. Not Patanjali, he's not saying that. Tradition, that's what Vedika means. You're not stumbling on anything. These are eternal truths. So therefore, Patanjali says, I'm just continuing in the old teachings, Anushasana. So then the question arises, where are they? If he's continuing teachings, where is he continuing them from? And that would be the Upanishads. And maybe other texts like the Mahabharata, Moksha Dharma, but nothing we need to worry about. So that's the first thing. we will, and not today, but by the time we get to the 5th or 6th session, we will encounter the earliest expressions of yoga, the very word yoga, and a description of the practices, which looks very much like what Patanjali is teaching. It has the word asana, it has the word prana, and ascetic sitting on the bank of the river, harnessing the mind. Different kind of language, harnessing the mind, more metaphoric language, but clearly engaging in dharana, dhyana type practices. We'll see the earliest expression of that in the Katha Upanishad and the Shvetashvatara Upanishad later on in the course. And then we'll understand how Patanjali is saying it's Anushasaning. It's already there. He's just systematizing it. I think of Patanjali as a systematizer. That's the first point. The second point is this. What's the second and third sutra? Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Tada kim? Then what happens? Tada kim? Drashtu Sarupe Vasthanam. The seer abides in its own nature. The drashtra is the same as the Ātman of the Upanishads, the Purusha of so the seer. So yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So Patanjali first sutra is continuing the old teachings of yoga, Atha Yoga Anu, continuing the old teachings, and then right away defines what it is in a good systematic, systematizer does that. We'll see the Upanishads are not systematic at all. But sutras have to be. That's the very nature of the sutra. So the second sutra then, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Stilling of the mind. But what do you want to do that for? What are you going to sit in the corner and still your mind for? What are you going to get out of that? So he has to quickly say, tada, then what happens? Tada, drashtu swarupe vastanam. The seer abides in its own nature. Okay, now, what does that mean? It means that there's a seer. Well, how do we know there's a seer? Where do we get that information from? Anyone doing chitta, no fool is going to do Chitta Vritti Nirodha for nothing. You're going to go sit in the forest for 50 years, the bank of the river, and meditate for 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day or in your living room. And what are you doing it for? You have to know, you have to be doing it because you want to experience your Ātman. Well, that means you have to know that you do have an Ātman. So where does that knowledge come from? Knowledge doesn't self-manifest, my friends. The mind is a chitta, it's a material thing. It only can throw up vrittis, which come from samskaras that have been deposited in there. The mind can only throw up images or thoughts of things for which it has the seed called a samskara. And that seed comes from something you've seen or heard or something that's coming through the senses. So if you go to California in the gold rush and you're seeking gold, you're not just jumping on a boat from Ireland randomly. You've heard through the ear that there is gold in someone tells you, or someone comes back from the California, back to Ireland with a sack of gold, and you've heard, and you've seen, and therefore you go jump on a boat and go to Ireland, to California to seek gold, because you have knowledge. Knowledge has entered your chitta through the medium of the oral, maybe somebody's told you, whatever means it, maybe read the newspaper, whatever it might be, you have received knowledge through your senses, that now you have knowledge, and now you go seek that thing. Well, this is no different. You're going to seek the Ātman, the drashtra, the seer. Well, how do you know there's a seer? No, it's not an obvious thing. Materialists will deny it. Modern materialists will, and ancient materialists did. Physicalists, we call them nowadays. Sensationists who believe there's only sensation, there's no kind of soul there, right? Physicalists, they're just forces and gravity and subatomic particles. So it's not obvious to everybody that there's a seer. So if you're going to Chitta Vritti Nirodha to realize your drashtuhu, your innermost self, that means you believe that there is knowledge in your mind, or at least there's a belief in your mind that there is such a thing as a seer to be experienced, that you can have a svarupa experience about. Well, where's that knowledge come from, my friends? Upanishads, the Jnana traditions. Okay, So anyone doing Patanjali yoga wouldn't just be doing it randomly, get, sort of, I don't know, you live in some village and one day, whatever, eating chapatis and dal and sabji. And then one day you just say, oh, let me go to the forest at Chitta-Vittinaroda. Of course not. You're going to do that because you've heard that life is suffering, that, the reason you're frustrated because you're looking for happiness in the wrong place, that you're not this body, that you're something else. You can experience that, all of that. What's that? Jnana. That's knowledge. Well, where's that come from? You said teacher, right? Where does the teacher get it from then? Ultimately, you trace it back, the genealogy of knowledge, and you end up in the Upanishads. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the Upanishads as the original, the earliest, no, maybe not quite, because there's some of this in the even earlier text, the Aranyakas that I mentioned, the third strata, even a hint or two in the earlier text, even in the Rig Veda. But the Upanishads is really where there is a focus on this knowledge, this thing called Ātman, and this ultimate truth called Brahman. And then based on that knowledge, one would be thoroughly immersed in that knowledge, studied that knowledge for many years before one would then think about, okay, well, you know what, am I just going to sit and read this all the rest of my life and then die? And then what? What good is that theoretical knowledge? Or should I try to use whatever I have left of life to actually experience it? In which case, then you take up a Chitta-Vritti-Nirodha practice. But only after intense study and contemplation and reflection. Vedanta says you should hear Shravanam, Mananam, reflect on it, Nitidhyasanam, apply logic to it. Try to. Indian philosophy is always engaging opposing points of view. Why do I believe this? What do the opponent says? What does the materialist say? Why do I want to believe in Ātman when materialists are perfectly intelligent people and they don't believe in it? So on what grounds am I going to decide I believe in it? So going through all those processes of intellectual vigor and intellectual activity, and then finally you become convinced enough that there is an Ātman, number one, and number two, frustrated enough with your conventional life. It's not giving you the happiness you seek, and all you're getting is white hair. And then thinking, okay, let me give this a go. Then you Chitta-Vritti-Nirodha. Okay, so all of which is to say, where does the knowledge come from in the first place? And that's the Upanishads. Okay, so 2 points. Using Patanjali's Yoga Sutra as a springboard. The first is he's claiming to anu shasanam, continue teachings. And we won't encounter the proto-yoga. Proto means a very early form of something. We won't encounter that in the Brihad, but we will, later on in the course. Number one, continuing. So therefore, the question is continuing from where? Upanishads. And there's other sources as well, but it'll be primarily the Upanishads because they are Shruti. And secondly, in order to do Chitta-Vritti, so as to have a drashtu experience, an avasthanam, an experience of the drashtu, svarupe, in its own nature, your own pure consciousness, conscious of consciousness, what it is. Consciousness is conscious, it cannot be not conscious because it's eternal, sat. So what's it going to be conscious of then if it's not conscious of the mind and body and the world out there? Can't turn it off. You can turn the mind off. You can nirodha it. You can turn the body off. Just blow your brains out. But you can't turn consciousness off. So what's consciousness going to be conscious of then if everything else is turned off? Pratyahara, you've closed out the world. And nirodha, the mind. It's self. Svarupa. So svarupa vastanam. So therefore, that before you don't know that until you've experienced it. You don't know that. You believe it to be true. And on what grounds do you believe it to be true? Because the sacred texts have told you, the sages have told you, the lineage has handed down the teachings across the centuries. There's a huge body of knowledge. There's a huge body of authorization, of confirmation, of verification. You still never know. But all of that together is substantial enough to make the yogi feel, okay, this is a rational act of faith. And then you say, okay, let me try it. Because anyway, life is miserable anyway, which by the way, we would call depression and they would call wisdom. We would call depression Notice that the characteristics of the enlightened being in the Gita, if a lot of those, I had a student do a paper on this. He mapped it up with the symptoms of depression. A lot of them were identical, solitude, life is suffering, all of this is just, always frustrating. A depressed person talks like that. So, but Patanjali calls it wisdom. Krishna calls it wisdom. It's wisdom only if you realize the world is unfulfilling and then start seeking elsewhere. Then it's wisdom. Otherwise, you're just stuck in a feeling of frustration with the world. Well, that is depression, yes. Then, of course. All right. Okay. So now we're ready to go into the Upanishads. I will be bringing it up on the screen, but for some reason, I thought I had the whole Brihad and the whole Chandogya, and it turns out I've only got half. So the first 5 verses, we'll just have to read together. And then once we get to page My Upanishads, as you will see here, it starts on page, and I didn't know that, this is the Sanskrit one. See, it starts here on page 38. So then we'll be doing this. We'll be reading the screen together. But for the first 5 verses, if you bear with me, I'm going to have to, then you have your text there and I'll have mine. So we start off, okay? So we're looking for jnana. We're going to be reading these texts. There's lots of ritualism in the texts, lots of things. Still, a lot of these seekers in the forest were still doing their Vedic rites, by the way. They're still Brahmanas, still doing their dharma, performing Vedic sacrifices. So we're not going to be interested in any of that. We're looking for jnana, the knowledge. Okay, jnana is the word for knowledge. It's another one of these Indo-European words, gya, gna, gna, kna, kno, to know. Why is there a K there in English? Why do you think there's a K there? Because once upon a time it was pronounced. Someone didn't just stick randomly stick a K there. It's actually German. It's Anglo-Saxons. Kennen, ken, to know. So in English, the K becomes silent at some point, and then we just say no, but we've still preserved the K. So this kno, gna in Greek, gno, gnosis, knowledge, jnana, you can see they sound the same. Why do they sound the same? Because they come from an original Indo-European root, which would be something like gna or kna. We don't know what it was, but linguists reconstruct that, and that's called historical linguistics. We don't have the original language. So my friends, enough of all of that. It's taken us 41 minutes, no more context. The rest of the workshop, reading the Upanishads. Hopefully some of that was useful to you. Page 15. Verse 8. This is the Brihad, great Aranyaka Upanishad. Notice, remember I said the third strata is not very distinctive? Well, notice how this is a bit, it's both an Aranyaka and an Upanishad. So the lines are a bit blurry, and it's the great one. And it's considered the oldest because of the language. There's lots of really obscure material. We don't necessarily understand it all. I'll give you an example. Before we do, we're looking at this as yogis. I picked out the jnana passages. By the way, the later Upanishads are much more user-friendly. People pick up the Upanishads. They've heard about the Upanishads. And look, go to page 7, the first verse. And they read the first verse and they haven't got a clue what it means and they give up. No. If you're starting to read the Upanishads, my friends, start with the Mundaka. That's like the Gita. It's about the user-friendly as the Gita is, and the Katha. Read the later ones, and then once you feel confident and secure and you realize how beautiful they are, then you can struggle with the Brihad. But look at the very, very first verse of all the Upanishads. The head of the sacrificial horse, so clearly we're still in the world of Vedic ritualism. The horse sacrificed, Ashvamedha, animals were sacrificed. The head of the sacrificial horse clearly is the dawn. Its sight is the sun. So you have all of these mystical, we don't particularly know what they mean. Its breath is the wind. Its gaping mouth is the fire common to all men. The body of the so there's lots of passages like this. We're not going to be reading those. We're going to be, its limbs of the seasons, its joints of the months and fortnights, and we can speculate about what this means. The first commentary that we have in the tradition is Shankara, but he's 8th, 9th century. That's my friends, is 2,000 years after this was written. So you can say, okay, what do the traditions say this means? Well, then you've got to go to Shankara then. But that's a pretty huge. That'll be like you writing an interpretation of the New Testament 2,000 years later. How about that? Shankara's 8th, 9th century. This was written. The Brihad was written 4th, 5th century BCE. So if you want to say to yourself, well, I don't care what these academic scholars say. They're just speculators and they're useless. Let me go with the tradition, fair enough. But then what? You've got 2,000-year gap. And then Shankara is going to apply his lens. Vedanta commentators have very different lenses. The different commentators read this very, very different. So I just want you to get a sense of the obscure, especially of the two early Upanishads, the Brihad, the Chandogya, also the Taittiriya. There's a lot of this cryptic passages, and scholars speculate. You can read what Shankara says 2,000 years later. You could read what scholars say, but a lot of it, and none of it very useful for yogis. We're going to go straight to the kind of classical Jnana Yoga sections, which I think we'll find interesting. So there we go, verse 8. It's Olivel. I don't know if he's changed page numbers, but in mine it's page 15 of Olivel. At the top of the page it says Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upanishad 1, 4, 10, and the 10 is always the last verse. So if 10 is the last, we go up 2 to 8. It's about a third of the way down. This innermost thing, this Ātman, it is dearer than a son. Innermost thing. There are inner things, my friends. The mind is an inner thing. The ego is an inner thing, but not the innermost thing. Notice the language. What is the most inner thing? The most inner thing is Ātman itself, it's consciousness. All right, so the Indian Vedanta tradition goes beyond the mind. Unlike Plato or the Greek philosophers, they didn't go beyond the mind. They thought the innermost thing was the mind. So Vedanta Bṛhadāraṇyaka would have said, hey, you got to keep going. That's inner, but it's not the innermost. It's more inner, but it's not the innermost. You got to keep going beyond the mind. So the innermost thing, this Ātman, it's dearer than the sun. It's dearer than wealth. It's dearer than everything else. Why do we do all of these things? Why do we want children? Why do we seek wealth? Because we think it's going to give pleasure to the self. So what is the dearest thing then? It's the self. We say we love our children. We say all this stuff, but really we love them because they give pleasure to the self. They give meaning to the self. So just call a spade then. And that's what this Upanishad is saying. If a man claims, if someone were to claim that something other than his self is dear to him, I say, no, it's not myself. My horse is the dearest most thing, or my house, or my wife, or my whatever, my yacht, my wealth. If someone were to say something like that, something other than himself is dear to him, and someone else were to tell him that he will lose what he holds dear, that is liable to happen. You'll lose your yacht, you'll lose your wife, you'll lose your kids. At the very least, you lose them when you're on a deathbed, if you don't lose them in life itself. Kids go off, right? Your wife might die or run off with another man or whatever it might be. It is definitely going to happen to everyone. This is just basic metaphysical truth, right? We leave everything. So we leave everything behind at death. So if someone were to tell him that he will lose what he holds dear, that is liable to happen. But you never lose yourself, because the self is eternal. You cannot lose it. It is who you are. It doesn't matter what state your body and mind are in. That Ātman is eternal. Wherever you end up with your karma, you end up in this birth or that birth, celestial realm, hellish realm, body of a tree, body of a bug, alligator, you name it. But the Ātman is always going to be. You cannot, even if you wanted to, you can't lose your Ātman. You commit suicide. You just go to some disembodied state of consciousness. You cannot, my friends. We are eternal. These are the first teachings of the Upanishads. Sat, that's what you've heard. Satchidananda. What does Sat mean? It's a present active participle of the Sanskrit root us, to be. So Sat means a present active participle. Present, it's always present, not past. I was. Sat is a participle is an adjective, and it's present, it's passive. I am that thing. So it's actually translating as being. because ing, anything that's ing is a present active participle. Walking, talking, speaking, going. In English, to make a present active participle in English, you put an ing on the verb. And as long as someone is in a walking and it doesn't stop, then you're always going to be walking. Unless someone says, okay, now he stopped. But the Ātman is always in the ising. I like to use the word ising, because if we make up words, it forces us to think, what do you mean by ising? That's not an English word. And it forces us to step out of our linguistic boxes and think carefully about what's being transmitted. Ising. It's always in a state of ising. Being is actually what we would say. And if something's always in that state, then you might as well say it's eternal then. So you notice that Sat is translated as eternal. It's not actually what it means. It means always in a state, an ongoing and a beginningless and endless state of ising, of being. Okay? So you can never lose it. So a man should regard only his self as dear to him. And this is the yogi. It doesn't admit, does it sound selfish? Well, everyone's selfish then. Everyone's selfish. Whatever we do and filter it through the self. So the yogis decided, well, let me seek the self, first of all. Let's figure out who this self is. Then we'll decide how to deal with the world and help others. All those are secondary considerations. How can I help anybody else if I don't know what the self is? The self that's supposedly helping others. So when a man regards only his self as dear to him, what he holds dear will never perish. You can never lose the self. So this is Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga, if you took my midterm exam, took a Rutgers midterm exam and midterm quiz, and it says define Jnana Yoga in 2 sentences, all you'd have to write to get 10 points would be Jnana Yoga is that body of material that speaks to, number one, the eternality of the Ātman, and number two, its distinction from the world, the body, the senses, the sense organs, and the mind. That's it, 10 points. And this whole Upanishad, Vedanta, Sankhya, and other schools you may not have heard of, Mimamsa, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, all of it is saying the same thing in different ways. Some using reason and argument, some quoting scriptures, some Patanjali talking about the states that lead to it, whatever they're talking about. The grand finale goal of Jnana Yoga is experience of the self. First knowledge, then experience. You can't experience something you don't know. Well, I suppose you can if it happened, like all of a sudden it snowed. But certainly you can't. You're not going to seek the Ātman unless you know it, and therefore you need knowledge. Kno, gna, jnana. All right, so that's the first Jnana Yoga verse we are engaging. And now we'll skip over the page. Top of page 17. If someone would depart the world without perceiving his own world, we don't even know there's a world out there. There's Buddhists, Yogacara Buddhists would deny there's even a world out there. Yogacara Buddhism. They're good philosophers. They'll give you a run for your money. So if someone would depart from this world without perceiving his own world, it would be of no use to him. That world is no use to him. Right, certainly no use to us on the deathbed, as it remains unknown to him. Just like the Veda that is not recited as a rite. So there's often these references to this mainstream. Remember, the yoga is going on the margins of society. The mainstream religion is Vedic ritualism. Don't think everybody in ancient India was a yogi. No, they were. It's a margin. These are radical kind of characters. One became the Buddha, one became Mahavir, and the yogis. They're not. The mainstream religion is Vedic, materialistic Vedic ritualism, where you do Vedic sacrifices, quite similar to the other Indo-European cultures, and you ask the celestials for stuff, for boons. Nothing particularly spiritual about it whatsoever. Very materialistic, actually, even though the hymns are beautiful and so forth. So there's often these references to this larger culture, just like if you're when the gurus came and introduced yoga to the West, they couldn't just use all the vocabulary of yoga. They had to make references to the Christian religion and the larger culture of the West. So they translate Brahman as God, which is pretty useless. Ātman as the soul, which is problematic. But in the beginning, you have to do that. And then slowly, once people become more familiar, then you can introduce more nuance. And in my opinion, you start introducing Sanskrit words, not trying to make them fit into Western vocabularies. West needs to step out of its box and engage the Sanskrit terms. And we're ready for that now, my friends. It's not the end of the 19th century when Vivekananda goes to the West. Nobody heard of, the only thing people thought about Hinduism, whatever the colonial missionaries and the Raj, the reports they sent back. It's not like that now. So we need to be learning these terms, and I think many of us are doing that. Okay. So what's the point of this world then? If you leave it without knowing your own innermost world, in other words, what's the purpose of life? That's the subtext here. The purpose of life is to know yourself, just like the great Greek philosophers would say. It is the self alone that a man should venerate in this world. What's the subtext here? Don't venerate the celestial beings with ritualism. Maybe they can give you the rain. Maybe they can give you victory over your enemies. And it's never denied that, by the way, there's no Vedic text says the Vedic rituals don't work. In fact, they assume that they do. The critique is not that, what are you throwing stuff in the fire for? It didn't rain. Don't you see? You just wasted a whole bucket load of grain. Never. The assumption is it works if you chant your mantras perfectly, can have the sound vibration, can enact cosmological change. That's the assumption. The critique is not that it doesn't work. The critique is, why are you wasting your time seeking ephemeral things? It does work, and sure, it will rain. But then what? Tomorrow you're going to do another sacrifice, and then what? And another one, and another one. And then what are you going to do at your deathbed? What good is all that going to be? That's the critique. Seek the true, seek the real, seek the eternal. These are the teachings of the Upanishads. Okay? So if someone venerates his self alone, not the celestial beings, just his self, that's the yogi, that right of his will never fade away. The practices that we do. Even Krishna at the end of the Gita says, if you don't finish in this life, you pick up in the next life. It's never lost. Right meaning, a set of practices. That right of his will never fade away, not like a Vedic ritual. It fades. You get whatever it is you're supposed to get, and then what? Then you do another ritual. Because from his very self, he will produce whatever he desires. In other words, the self is the ultimate foundation of everything. Okay, so these are wonderful Jnana Yoga passages. Let's go to page 26. And here we have a passage that the theistic Vedanta, all right, Ramanuja, we're not going to be talking too much about the different Vedanta schools. We will do another workshop. Let's honor the Upanishads. We'll be hard pressed to even do much in 6 sessions. That's why I'm saying we can always add a couple more if we want to. We'll do Vedanta another time. And Vedanta then we'll be discussing what's the relationship between Ātman and Brahman, what's the relationship between Brahman and Ishvara, and what's this world? Is it real or false? Those are the topics that become systematic, that differentiate the Vedanta traditions. And that will be for another workshop, my friends. But just so that you know, this verse, the theist Ramanuja, 12th century. Now, if you may say, I've never heard of Ramanuja, but you've heard of Krishnamacharya, you've heard of Guruji Iyengar, and they come in that lineage. And you recognize it by the white and the red. And that's the Sri Vaishnava lineage, which is very prominent in Tamil Nadu. Guruji Iyengar, to the end, he was a Sri Vaishnava. I personally met him once, and I got a chance to ask him. Yeah, absolutely. To the end, he identified with that lineage. Whatever he taught, asana and all that, but the other side of Guruji Iyengar, Krishnamacharya was staunch. And he was prominent. The whole lineage wanted him to take over the entire, the headquarters, the principal mutt of Sri Vaishnavism. That's huge. It's like the papacy or something of that lineage. And he didn't. He's such a good scholar. So the orthodox Sri Vaishnava. All of this is to say, this verse Ramanuja quotes to indicate that there is a God and that creation is somehow supported and it's that God basically underpins creation. As a spider sends forth its thread, and as tiny sparks spring forth from a fire, so indeed do all the vital functions, the pranas, all the worlds, all the gods, and all beings spring from this self, Brahman. But the term Brahman and Ātman, I don't want to get into all of that in this course, but let's just say they can be interchangeable. Now, are they identical? Whether they're identical or not, that is what separates the answer to that question. Is Ātman absolutely and unconditionally and completely one with Brahman, or is it just a spark, an eternal spark, an individual spark of Brahman? The answer to that question is what distinguishes the Vedanta lineages, and that will be a topic for another workshop. But for now, everyone accepts that Brahman, everything emanates from Brahman. The Vedanta Sutra, which we will look at if we decide to do another workshop, we'll have to decide if we want to do that. But if we do, the first verse, like Patanjali introduces it, Patanjali Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Now we're going to continue teachings of yoga. First sutra of Vedanta is Atato Brahma Jignasu. Now, Jignasa. Now there's going to be inquiry in Brahman, into Brahman. What is this Brahman? So he just tells us what. But the second sutra, just like Patanjali's second sutra, first sutra says we're going to continue yoga. Second sutra defines it. What is this yoga? What is Chitta Vritti Nirodha? How is Brahman defined? Second sutra Vedanta. Janmadiyasya yataha, that from which creation emanates. That's this verse. And so this verse, right, is Ramanuja is saying that from which creation, like the spider is an intelligent being, all Vedantins accept that Brahman is intelligent. And the word for that is Chit. And that, now we talked about Sat, Isi. Well, we've heard of Satchidananda, haven't we? Well, what's the second word is Chit, intelligent, conscious. So the sutra number 5 says Ikshater, it's intelligent. But the point is here that Brahman is that from which the universe emanates. It's an intelligent cause. And the Vedanta has to then defend that against the materialists and others who want to argue that we don't need to posit an intelligent cause. Let the law of karma be the cause. Let the souls themselves be the trigger of creation. And all the different schools. And the second chapter of Vedanta engages all of these different points of view. And we'll look at that if we decide to do a workshop another time. But for now, as a spider sends forth its thread, as tiny sparks from a fire, so all the vital functions, the prana, the worlds, the gods, and all beings spring from the self, Atman. You could plug in Brahman there. It's hidden names. Notice how he likes to translate Upanishad as hidden name. Its Upanishad is the real behind the real. This world appears real, right? This table, unless you're a Yogacara Buddhist, it's, most other schools, only the Yogacara, even the other Buddhists debated the Yogacara. Even in most Buddhist schools, there's a real world out there. Of course, now what does it consist of? Is it the 3 gunas of Sankhya? Is it momentariness of the Buddhists? That's a metaphysical issue, but there's a real out there. But the real behind the real, and that's obviously Atman itself, consciousness. So it's the real behind the real, a deeper level real. Remember the innermost self in the first verse, the inner, the deepest level of truth. For the real consists of the vital functions. The real consists of the pranas, and the self is the real behind the vital functions. Without consciousness, the pranas can do nothing. The pranas which sustain the body, the life airs. You've all heard of prana. Surely you've heard of pranayama. So there are a number of pranas, 5 principal ones. Some talk of 10. And these are subtle. Are they just air? It's interesting. People define them differently. I have a whole book on my desk in my office. What is prana? It's not just the air we breathe in through the nose. Some may say that, but there are different views about what it is. Some would say it's air mixed with consciousness, and so there's different positions on this. But anyway, vital functions. So it is, for the real consists of the vital functions, and the self is the real behind the functions. Okay? All good Upanishadic stuff. Let's go over the page 27 verse 3. So there are 2 visible appearances, the rupa. We know rupa, svarupa, your own nature. So there are 2 rupas, natures of Brahman. Because remember, everything's Brahman, but is Brahman only the world? Like the deists thought in Europe in 19th century Enlightenment thinkers? Brahman may be the world, but Brahman is also something beyond the world and more than the world in Vedanta. It's not exhausted by the world. No Vedantin says that. The Brahman is only the world. But it is nonetheless, because the very definition of Brahman is that from which creation emanates, the world emanates. The second sutra, Janmadi Asya Yataha. Where are we, Marilyn? We're on page 27, 2.36. And I'll be able to bring up on the screen as soon as we get to page, because my text starts on page 34. Then I have to look at myself. Two visible appearances of Brahman. The one is a fixed shape, the other is without a fixed shape. One is mortal, the other is immortal. The one is stationary, the other is in motion. The one is sat, the other is cham, which is a made-up word, but they put them together, you get satyam. But sat is what we've been discussing is a synonym for the Ātman. You can call it the sat. Sometimes the Upanishads say it's the sat, or you can call it the chit. You don't have to say sat, chit, ananda. That's three qualities. You can just say it's the sat. It's the one that's always in a state of ongoing existence. It's the eternal one. Or you can say chit. It's the conscious. It's consciousness. Okay. So two. Then there's the world that's moving and no fixed fixed shape and immortal. And there's the sat, which is immortal, without a fixed shape, and so on. This is all Jnana Yoga. The Upanishads are, metaphoric. They like to play with words. Very different from sutras. Sutras, no poetry, no metaphors, no nothing. Just very minimalistic, just jnana, just intellectuality compressed into sutras. And therefore, only scholars read them. Only the average Hindu didn't read sutras. There's more people reading Yoga Sutras, I always say this, in America than there is in India, and it has been for centuries. The scholastic tradition, it's just like, some of you have heard me say this, how many Christians are reading, Augustine or Aquinas or Eusebius, the early church fathers? Only those in seminaries. What's the average Christian reading then? The stories of the saints, the New Testament, same. This is scholastic stuff, but not the Upanishads. They're not like that. They're not sutraic. Okay, so moving on, and we get to another famous passage across the page, and the famous neti neti. What is Brahman? Na iti, you can't. What can you say about it? Because think about language, my friends. When we say something, those words are a verbalization of a thought, and a thought is a samskara, and a vritti comes from a samskara, thinking comes from samskara, and a samskara is an imprint of something that's come in through the five senses. Now, you might put it together and create conceptual thought, but ultimately, if you go down to the base of all thought, at some point you get to an empirical sense datum. So, but the senses cannot perceive Atman. So we have no imprint. We have an imprint about Atman. We have sort of theoretical, we read there is an Atman, but not a direct imprint of Atman. In the same way as I have a direct imprint of this 10 pence. Okay, there's a good old Queen of England. So you could look at it and close your eyes, and now you have a samskara for it. You don't have that sort of a samskara for the Atman. All you have for the Atman is you read it in the Upanishads. You read it in a book. So now you have that concept in your mind, not the direct Atman itself. And same with Bhagavan, right? If you're a bhakta, you have Bhagavan in the mind. What is it? It's a description that you read in the text. You think Krishna's blue, so you create an image of your blue that you know, and so on. Okay, so therefore, when you actually try to describe it, even Patanjali, where I remember in the section we talked about the seer and the scene, most of those verses are the scene. When he comes to the seer, he just says, Shuddho api, it's pure. Shuddho api, even though it's pure, pratyaya anupasya, it's absorbed in the mind. It doesn't tell you what it is, it doesn't describe it. Just says it's pure. What does pure mean? Pure means it doesn't need to be mixed. Doesn't tell you anything about it. If I say pure milk, what I mean is it's not mixed. It's not telling me anything about the milk. So if you say Ātman is pure, you're just saying it's not mixed with something. It doesn't tell you anything about it. You can't say anything about it. But you can say Sat, it is. In fact, there's even a beautiful Upaniṣadic verse where it says, what can we say about it other than it is? Hopefully we'll run into that. Okay? But one thing you can do is say what it's not. And that's verse number, top of page 28, third line. Here then is the rule of substitution, na iti. In Sanskrit, two words together, not this, not this, not this, not this. It's not the table, it's not the chair, it's not the mountain, it's not the world out there. It's not even my mind. So what is it? No, well, let's just get rid of what it's not. That's as good as we can do. And that in Sanskrit is na plus iti becomes neti. Because in Sanskrit, the words merge, the vowels coalesce, and instead of na iti, you get neti. So neti, 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 not this. So that's very famous for those who study Vedanta, especially Advaita Vedānta. Shankaracharya likes this. This then is the rule of substitution. Neti, neti. For there is nothing beyond this na-iti. At least there's nothing that we can know with our minds. And this is the name, the real behind the real. The real that we see, neti, neti, not that real, not that real. No, there is a real tree out there. Yeah, we're not Yogacara Buddhists if you're a Vedantian. There's a real tree out there, but naeti, naeti, no, it's not that, not the sky, not my life breath, not my mind, not anything out there. Neti, 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 neti. Okay? And he's the real behind the vital functions as we had before. So there's a good deal of repetition. Okay, although this is mainly a male-dominated environment, certainly later Vedantic study is male. You have to be a male Brahmana to go down even today. If you go to the super Orthodox acharyas, in the Upanishads, there were women and powerful women. Let's look at Maitreyi. She's a lady. Maitreyi. So Maitreyi, Yajnavalkya is probably the most frequently encountered sage in the Upanishads. Powerful debater. And he has two wives. And the tradition says he's about to take sannyas. He's going to go off to the forest, renounce the world, end of the life. He's supposed to take sannyas, the 4 stages of life, right? Brahmacharya, 25 years, celibate student, 25 years, householder, married. 25 years, you live with your wife as a celibate, ascetic couple, performing tapas and austerities and preparing for, of course, death and preparing your mind for death, for that great transit, that great moment. And then the last stage you separate, because if you die attached to anything, well, that attachment's like an anchor that just drags you back. So husband and wife in the ideal system, don't think everybody did this, it's just the idealized system. The husband takes sannyas and the wife at that point does too. Okay, so he's going to do this. Maitreya Yajnavalkya once said, look, I'm about to depart from this place. Even though he doesn't say I'm going to take sannyas, the commentators, that's how the commentators take it. He's going to take sannyas. Sannyas means the final state of complete renunciation. And in India, they usually you hold a staff and you wear saffron, and you either you shave your head usually, right? Because you're renouncing everything, even your hair. So I'm about to depart from this place. So come, let me make a settlement between you and Katyayani. He wants to take care of them. He's going to go off and he says, okay, I'm going to divide everything so you'll be protected and then you can, do your own practices safe in, whatever, however he makes the settlement. So he's going to give them, he's going to bequeath all of his material things to them. He's going to go off and renounce the world. Maitreya asked in reply, if I were to possess the entire world filled with wealth, sir, would it make me immortal? See, right back in his face. You want to fob off some material things to me? Is that going to make me immortal? No, said Yajnavalkya, it would only permit you to lead the life of a wealthy person. Through wealth, one cannot expect immortality. What is the point in getting something that will not make me immortal? Retorted Maitreyi. Tell me instead, sir, all that you know. So there's a powerful yogic mind at work. Why are you trying? You're going to go up and take sannyas and seek your Atman. What? You're going to just give me a bunch of material things, and so I become attached to them. What good is that going to be when I die? Tell me what you know, she says. And of course, a real teacher is delighted when he hears words like that. Yajnavalkya said in reply, "You've always been very dear to me, and now you speak something very dear to me. Come and sit down. Upanishad." There it is. Come and sit down when the student is sincere. Upanishad. Don't remember that one. Next time someone comes and then see a sincere question, say Upanishad, Upanishad. Aye beta, beti. I will explain to you. And then he says the same thing that we had before. The Upanishads are repetitive, and they have to be repetitive because remember, there was no books. It was all oral. I mean, there were parchments. A few Brahmins had their parchments, but mostly it was all oral. So, we take it for granted, right? You read a book, and if you miss something, you just go back and check it again. Or to speak of a computer, it's go online, wiki. But if you're receiving oral transmission, you can't do that. So therefore, you have to hear it again and again and again and again. So you go away. So you'll notice a lot of the passages, that, they'll be saying the same thing in different ways, and the refrain will be the same. So you go away with a really solid samskara, a solid memory of whatever is the essence of that teaching. So one holds a husband dear, just as we had before, you see, not out of love of the husband, rather is out of love for oneself. I mean, it's kind of a rather harsh and brutal truth, but isn't it the case? I mean, maybe you would resist this. But the Upanishads and the yogis would say, well, all this love business, you think you love, but really it's because it gives satisfaction to the self. It's the self that you ultimately is the sort of grounding point of all of these other relationships that we have. They're grounded in the self. We think they're going to give satisfaction to the self. And then we talk of love and all this other stuff. One holds a wife dear, not out of love, and it's repetitive. One holds a wife dear, not out of love for a wife, rather it's a love for oneself that one holds a wife dear. One holds children dear, not out of love for children. And he goes on for, 20 lines. So you go away, all he's changing is one word. One holds children dear, not out of love for children, rather it's love for oneself. One holds wealth dear, not out of love for wealth, rather it's out of love for oneself. So what do you go away with? It's love for myself. I should be seeking myself. All these other things I'm doing, thinking they're going to give happiness to myself. Well, why don't I just seek the self then? Could be right. So over the page 29, and and he sums it up there. You see, Maitreya, after going through the whole list, it's wealth and children and royal power and all these things. He ends up then. Top of page 29. You see, Maitreyi, it's oneself, Atman, which one should see and hear. One's running after all these things, thinking they're going to give happiness to the self, and none of them, of course, do. They cannot. So just seek the self then. It's the self which one should see and hear. This is Jnana Yoga. And this is what Patanjali says. After you've read this, studied it, engaged it, deeply imbibed the Upanishads, then you're ready for Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Atta then, Yoga Anushasanam Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So by seeing and hearing oneself, by reflecting and concentrating on oneself, one gains knowledge of this whole world. Why? Because Brahman, remember the second verse of the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadhyasya Yataha, this entire universe emanates from Brahman. So by knowing the Atman, which is connected to Brahman, and we're not going to get into how it's connected because that's what separates the Vedanta traditions. But in some sort of way, Brahman underpins all reality. So if you know Atman, you know indirectly or directly, depending on your school, you know everything. You're connected to everything. And these seeing and hearing, reflecting and concentrating. These are the processes of Vedanta. You hear about the Atman, he's got seeing here, but Vedanta has hearing, Shravanam, then talking about, no, they don't say that. They shravanam, then manana, you reflect on it, reflect on the teachings. That's where you apply logic. That's where you apply bringing opposing points of view. The second phase, first you hear it. And notice they don't say you dogmatically accept it. They don't say, oh, you've heard it. It's the Upanishad, don't ask any questions. It's a divine text. It's an eternal text. Just accept. They never say that. You hear it, and then you manana, reflect on it. And that's where you study logic. And part of it, the training for Vedanta is you study logic, you study metaphysics, you study epistemology, what we'd now call in religion, in philosophy departments, epistemology and metaphysics, ontology. You apply, in ancient Indians had the equivalents of all of this, and you apply that. Okay, that's manana. And then once you decided, yes, it's solid, it's coherent, it makes sense, it holds its own against other opposing points of view, it can hold its own ground. In fact, it's from your point of view, it's better than opposing points of view. Opposing points of view have some weaknesses or features that your view doesn't. Once you're convinced in all of that, then concentrate. Then now you're ready for meditation. Now, my friends, you're ready for Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Now you're ready for, okay, let me go for it. My faith is firm, not dogmatically, not blindly, not just because some ancient text said it, but I've applied logic and reason. I've debated, I've engaged, I've contemplated alternatives. I've been deeply engaged alternatives. I've seen what those other schools say about my school. That's what you've got to do. So all very well saying what your school says about another school. You really want to give yourself a workout, not just what your school says about the other school. What does the other school say about your school? When when I first encountered, I'm a Vaishnava, I'm a Bhakta of Krishna. And when I was years in India, only in Vrindavan, in these, bhakti places, nobody questions, everybody's a Bhakta. You don't have to deal with any alternative points of view. But when I, came back to academia and then studied Buddhism and these other traditions and saw what they said about theism, it was really very challenging. And I have to say, there are some arguments they're good arguments. You just say, I don't have an answer for that. But still, at the end of the day, you're going to end up with if you are a deep level practitioner, you have to put your money somewhere. You can't go jumping around all over the place. You go deep. So at some point you take that, you feel, okay, this is the best investment. This makes the most sense. This appeals to my intellect, my samskaras. Remember, it's not your Ātman. It's the samskaras you happen to have in your mind at this moment in life, right? Which have accumulated from who knows how many lives. You've done read stuff in the past, accumulated. So now you have this whole cluster of samskaras, and this tradition is going to somehow, your samskara is going to resonate with that and not with that. That's all it is. And understanding that, you can respect others because you understand my commitment to my tradition is just my samskaras, and other people have different samskaras. Naturally, they're going to connect to another tradition. And when understanding that, then you can be humble and not arrogant and dogmatic, and you can respect others from a real place, not just a politically correct place. So that's all manana, reflecting and concentrating on oneself. Then one gains the knowledge of this whole world, because remember, Brahman is the whole world. So here we are, these wonderful Upanishads, my friends. It's such a treat to read them with you. Okay, let's just go down the same page to verse number 7. It's like this. When a drum is being beaten, you cannot catch the external sounds. You can catch them only by getting hold of the drum or the man beating the drum. Okay, he's going to say, well, what they do is they say the same thing, but use 3 or 4 different metaphors. Here's what he's basically saying is, you can't catch consciousness. You can only catch the body within which consciousness is, that transmits consciousness. So you can see the body, you can even, in some ways, you can't even grasp the mind, but at least you can understand there is a mind. You can infer there is a mind because of because of mental activity, it's not a physical thing. You can't grasp consciousness. Okay, so now that's the point he wants to make. You can only grasp the body that manifests consciousness. So it's like this. When a drum is being beaten, you cannot catch the external sounds like consciousness in the metaphor. You catch them only by getting hold of the drum, right? You can only catch consciousness by grabbing hold of a person who is conscious, but that's the external. Just like the drum is not the sound, but you can't catch the sound, you can only catch the drum. So keeping that in mind, he's going to give three different metaphors, very Upanishadic. This is a very Upanishadic sort of way of teaching. So, or when a conch is being blown, you cannot catch the external sounds. You catch them only by getting hold of the conch or the man blowing the conch. Or when a lute is played, you cannot catch the external sounds. You catch them only by getting hold of the lute or the man playing the lute. So it is with consciousness. You can't grasp it. You can't see it. You can't get a hold of it. All you can do is grab a hold of something that contains it, a physical body, just like the conch, which emits the sound. Very bottom of the page. Lots of metaphors. So this is not really systematic philosophy. It's proto-philosophy. It has philosophical passages. It certainly has deep and profound thought, but it's not philosophy in a systematic sort of way that a sutra is. But beautiful, profound. Last line. It's like this. When a chunk of salt is thrown in water, it dissolves into that very water, and it cannot be picked up in any way. Yet, from whichever, okay, you put salt, the idea is consciousness pervades the whole body, and you can't pick up consciousness. So just he's saying, look, it's just like even salt, you can't do that. You put salt in, you put it in one corner of the glass, but it pervades the whole glass of water. So it cannot be picked up in any way. Yet, from whichever place one may take a sip, the salt is there. You take it on this side of the cup, that side of the cup. You're still, right? So wherever you touch the body, consciousness is there, pervades it. In the same way, this immense being, Brahman or Ātman, has no limit or boundary and is a single mass of perception, chit, cetana, consciousness. That's all it is. It's a massive, he's using the language of a massive consciousness. It arises out of and arouses out of and together with these beings and disappears after them. Ātman enters the body and leaves the body. So I say, after death there is no awareness. And after Yajnavalkya said this, Maitreya exclaimed, now, sir, you've really confused me by saying after death there's no awareness, because she's thinking, oh, hang on, isn't the Ātman supposed to be immortal? Isn't it supposed to be immortal? Isn't it supposed to leave the body? Isn't that what reincarnation is? Why are you saying that after death there's no awareness then? So she's confused. Maitreya, good student. And she's not timid, powerful woman. She surfaces several times. She says, you confused me by saying after death there's no awareness. He replied, look, I haven't said anything confusing. This body you see has the capacity to perceive. We have senses, organs of perception. But when there is a duality of some kind, then one can smell the other, see the other, right? To see something, that thing has to be different from me. So there has to be a duality. Here's a cup, I see it, I taste it, I smell it, I touch it. So there's a duality, distinction between me and the cup. So any act of perception requires a duality between the perceiver and the object of perception. So, when there's a duality of some kind, then one can smell the other, see the other, hear the other, greet the other, one can think of the other and perceive the other. When, however, the whole has become one's very self, this is very monistic. Shankara likes this passage. That, the soul, those who say the soul merges into Brahman and becomes the whole, not all Vedantins agree with that. But this is a passage that would support that. When, however, the whole has become oneself, then who is there for one to smell, and by what means? There's no duality. In fact, Shankara's 8th century Vedanta philosophy is called Advaita, no duality. Because perception requires duality. And Advaita then, so this is what he's saying. So if one has become the whole, then what are you going to see? What are you going to smell? So in that sense, there's no awareness. Not that consciousness doesn't exist, but there's no objective consciousness. So there's no awareness of other. That's the point. So who is there? Who is there for one to see and by what means? Who is there for one to hear and by what means? You don't have the instruments of perception and you don't have any objects of perception. Who is there for one to greet and by what means? Who is there for one to think, etc. By what means, little paragraph, by what means can one perceive him, the Ātman meaning him, by means of whom one perceives this whole world? The Ātman is the perceiver. How do you perceive the perceiver? And that's Patanjali just says, Svarupe Vastanam. But okay, you get rid of all organs of perception. That's the Patanjalian method. What's Patanjalian method? Right? What's Pratyahara? Get rid of the organs of perception. Fifth limb. Fifth limb. And then what? What are you doing in dharana, dhyana, and so on? You're getting rid of the internal organ of perception, the mind. So put it all together. What are you doing? Getting rid of all instruments of perception. Why? Tada svarupe drashtu sarupe vastanam. Then, when you've tossed out all the instruments of perception, then the seer can abide in its own nature. Okay? And here he's saying something similar. How can you perceive? You can't perceive him with the mind or the senses. By what means can one perceive him? By means of whom one perceives the whole world. The Ātman is the perceiver. How are you going to perceive the perceiver? What instruments are you going to use? By what means can one perceive the perceiver? Isn't it good? Say yes. Verse 32, over the page. Verse 15, right in the middle. Page 32, top of the page, it says 2, 5, 12. This very Ātman is the Lord and King of all beings. So you see, this is not philosophical language. The Upanishads are poetic, they're metaphoric, but they're profound. But this is not, the sutras are for trained philosophers and intellectuals. Brahmins that are trained from the age of 5, they learn Sanskrit, they master Sanskrit, they memorize the whole of Panini's 4,000 sutra grammar before they start studying anything. And then so the sutras are for trained intellectuals, equivalent to our, advanced departments of science and philosophy and theology. But this is kind of just ministry, it's teaching, but doesn't make it, it doesn't make it not profound. In fact, the scholastic traditions, all they do is take this and scholasticize it and systematize it and make it intellectually rigorous. They're not adding anything. The sutras do not see themselves as adding. It's not like you do a PhD, you have to add something. You have to come up with a thesis no one else has come up with. Otherwise, you don't get your PhD. You have to contribute to the body of knowledge. Not like that. The sutras accept this as absolute truth. And the sutras then is to say, okay, we need to systematize it. There's challenges, Buddhists are challenging it. The age of Kali, there's a sense of the age of Kali, the fourth age. Knowledge is going to be lost. People are going to cheat. People are going to, twist, whatever. There's a sense of impending doom and a sense that we need to preserve our traditions and we need to preserve them intellectually as well, because Buddhists are now, questioning and fundamental Upanishadic truths, such as there is an eternal Ātman. So at that point, you now have to mount a philosophical defense. You can't just use metaphoric language and, salt in the water. You now have to engage in rigorous philosophy. So that's a later, and in Buddhism, it's later too. The Buddha was not a philosopher at all. So this very self is the Lord and King of all beings. As all the spokes are fastened to the hub and rim of a wheel, so to oneself, Ātman, are fastened all beings. It's the support of everything. Our body is sustained because of the Ātman. The whole universe is sustained because of the Brahman, the cosmic Ātman. All the gods, all the worlds, all the breaths, and all these bodies are all fastened to the Ātman. And again, repetition. Second Sutra of Vedanta. What is the definition of Brahman? How do they define Brahman? Patanjali defines yoga as chitta vritti nirodha. How do the Vedantins? They're not talking about Brahman. Their Vedanta Sutra is about Brahman. Introducing the first sutra, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Now we're going to initiate an inquiry into Brahman. Second sutra, what is it? How are you going to define this Brahman? Janmadi asya yataha. That from which this world emanates and is sustained and eventually dissolves back into. That's the definition. Okay. So we've done that. 39. So now I can bring up mine. I don't have to look at myself. We go to page 39. There it is. And how do I get this out of the way? Push it up there. Put that up there. And if you want to follow on the screen, you can. So, 39. Then Kahola Kaushitaki began to question him. Notice Yajnavalkya is all over the place in the Upanishads. Yajnavalkya, he said, explain to me the Brahman that is plain, not cryptic. Right? This is actually, there's also humor here. There's a little humor here. I'd see if you can maybe find a little humor here. Explain plain and simple. No, don't you start waffling all of this, all the theological stuff, and you're running around with all your fancy terms and metaphysical categories. Just plain and simple. Explain to me the Brahman's plain and simple and not cryptic. The self that is within all. Just give me a straightforward. Don't hide behind your philosophy and your conceptual structures and your fancy vocabulary. So what's the answer? The self within all is the self of yours, says Yajnavalkya. And Kahola is not very satisfied. Which one is the self within all, Yajnavalkya? This is, I think, my favorite passage down here. And I'll tell you when we get there. Which is the self within all? He's the one who is beyond hunger and thirst, beyond sorrow and delusion, beyond old age and death. The Ātman. It is when they come to know this self, not the bodily self, not the mental self, this one, the one that's beyond the body and mind, that Brahmins give up the desire for sons. If you're a Brahmin, you have to have a son because you have to, keep the lineage going. Give up the desire for wealth, right? You do your rituals because you want wealth. And the desire for worlds. Here it means that if you're a Brahmin and you do your rituals and you're good Brahmin, then your next birth you go to a celestial realm. Not liberation. Still in samsara, still in the cycle of birth and rebirth, but you get to stay there for a nice long time till your karma runs out. They're called celestial realms. Here he calls them the worlds, but they're the higher worlds. So when they come to know the self, that the Brahmins give up the desire for world and what? Undertake the mendicant life, the life in the forest, seeking the Ātman, giving it all up, the ascetic. You've been to India. You've seen the sadhus, or you've seen them on TV with their loincloths and their dreadlocks, something we haven't seen in the West for centuries and centuries. Still a massive, thriving subculture in India. Tens of millions, no way of counting them. These are the mendicants. So the desire for sons, after all, is the same as desire for wealth, and the desire for wealth is the same as the desire for worlds. Both are simply desires. They're just different flavors of desires. They're just desires. Patanjali calls them raga. They're kleshas. They deviate consciousness. They distract consciousness into the things of the world. And so we run around the world trying to find pleasure through objects of consciousness. And we never find it. And we get old. And our hair goes white. And then one day we're on our deathbed. And it's too late. Then we have to come back and we get reborn, depending on our karma. But the yogis see the fault in all of that. They see the fault in that, the flaw in that. They want to seek the self. Right. Here, this is my favorite line. Because, being an academic, I love this. Therefore, a Brahmin should stop being a pundit. Stop trying to be clever. Stop trying to be an academic. A real Brahmin, one who really wants to know Brahman, not these ritualistic Brahmins. There's different kinds of Brahmins. There's those that just do Vedic rituals and they get paid. The patron pays them to do a ritual. Or I want to do a sacrifice so I can get to the celestial realm next life. And they pays the Brahmins chant all the mantras. They're just professional ritualists. There's those kind of Brahmins. But then the Brahmins, as the name itself implies, who are actually seeking Brahman. They're not all the same. So here we go. Therefore, a real Brahmin should stop being a pundit, trying to be knowledgeable and making an impression. Try to live like a child. When you stop living like a child or a pundit, he becomes a sage. And when he has stopped living like a sage, or the way he was before he became a sage, he becomes a Brahmin. Now he's a real Brahmin. He's come all the way back, but now what's a real Brahmin? It's someone who seeks Brahman. He remains just such a Brahmin, no matter how he may live. Now, know the Sarvam Dukkam, the first noble truth of Buddhism, all is suffering. Patanjali 2:15, right? Sarva Vivekanaha Sarvam Dukkam. Here it is, the origin of it. All besides this is grief. Anything other than seeking the Ātman, my friends, we remain frustrated and unfulfilled. You don't need to accept this because it's written in a Sanskrit text. You can perceive it immediately. Just pay attention to your own mind and be honest, which means be humble. And notice how we're always, there's always a sort of deep level sense of kind of some existential lacking, some deep level of unfulfillment. That's what, when he says everything is suffering, it doesn't just mean horrific suffering. It can mean that too, of course. But it can just mean this sense of malaise, lovely word, existential malaise, ill at easeness. All besides this is grief. Here is the first, early, very early kind of this sort of statement pertaining to everything is frustration other than seeking deep level truth. So that's that one. And then we'll move to page 39. Oh, we just did that one. And now we have another page 40. We have another lady. Where's page 40? Here. And remember the mainstream culture at the time. Often there's these references to the larger Vedic culture because clearly people go into the forest to seek a teacher. They have their head full of samskaras, from normal life. And what's normal life? The Vedic ritualism. That's the religiosity of the day. Performance of Vedic rites. So you'll see these references to the Vedic rites. Although the teacher is going to try to ultimately present Brahman as the ultimate truth. Then Gargi Vachaknavi began to question him. Yagnivalk, she said, tell me, since this whole world is woven back and forth in water, so some kind of cosmogonic myth like Genesis, the beginning was water. So you get references to, even in Vaishnavism, Vishnu reclines on the water. Actually, that's what Shesha is. That's what Patanjali is. Patanjali is the incarnation of Shesha, the 1,000-headed serpent upon whom Vishnu reclines on the water in the beginning of creation. And the universes emanate out of every pore of his skin, parallel universes. So since this whole world is woven back and forth on water in some sort of way, there's water is primordially in the material point of view, was somehow materially a pre-existed creation. So this world is woven back and forth on water. And what then is water woven back and forth? On air, Gargi. And what is air woven back and forth? On the worlds. And he goes through the typical Upanishadic thing. You go through 7 or 8, same question. Intermediate region, Gargi. These are all the celestial realms. What are the intermediate regions woven back and forth? World of the Gandharvas, celestials, and it goes on and on and on and on, okay? And he goes up through all these realms. These are all celestial realms, higher realms with people with good karma, right? Worlds of the sun, worlds of the moon. The Gandharvas are like angels in Christianity with wings. Worlds of the gods, worlds of Indra, the highest celestial, worlds of Prajapati. And finally, this is the creator God, the small creator, the creator of the forms of the world, Prajapati. So that's the highest celestial. So, and that's Prajapati. And what are the worlds of Indra woven back and forth? And the worlds of Prajapati, Gargi. On what then are the worlds of Prajapati woven back and forth? On the worlds of Brahman, Gargi. And then, of course, she's a wise guy or a wise lady. She goes, and what then? It's like saying, well, God. Well, who made God then? Well, God made the world. Who made God, right? Some kid could say. Well, God made this, God made that. Who made God? Why do you answer that? Well, no, God, nobody made God. So same thing. On the worlds of Brahman, Gargi, everything has a foundation of truth. whether it's Big Bang, whether it's materialism, whether it's God, whether it's, Brahman, any system of thought has to ultimately come to a stop sign and just accept what we call a foundational truth. It just is. It's that everything is founded on that foundational truth. In the Vedanta and the Upanishads, it's Brahman. In physicalist science, it's the Big Bang. Okay? You can't get, and you can say, well, what came before that? You can't answer that question. No one can tell you what came before the Big Bang. Nobody can, if you say what came before God, you just say, no, God is. So that's just a foundational dogmatic truth. Everybody, all systems are going to end up at some point in that place of a foundational dogmatic truth. So in the Vedanta, it's Brahman. So she says, and what then are the worlds of Brahman woven back and forth? At this, Yajna gets a bit fed up here. At this point, Yajnavalkya told her, don't ask too many questions, Gargi, or your head will shatter apart. We're not quite sure what that means. It's not an insult, but it means something. We see it several times in the Upanishads. It's sometimes compared to, in the 60s counterculture, you blow your mind, you take psychedelics, and it blows, remember that, I don't know, some of you were children of the counterculture. I was. So, oh man, it blows your mind. Now, imagine someone 1,000 years from now who's divorced from that culture, and and they do some archaeology and they dig up some, hippie texts from the 60s, and they come across this expression, blows your mind. You wouldn't know what it meant. If it just that expression, what does that mean, blows your mind? So it's something like that. We're not entirely clear. It sounds rude. It sounds dismissive, but maybe it means you're thinking too much, something like that. We're going to speculate. Don't ask too many questions, Gargi, or your head will shatter apart. You're asking too many questions about a deity. Of course, it's not really a deity, but he's just using that language, whom one should not ask too many questions. You can't go beyond that. It's like saying, who made God? You can't ask anything about God. It's omnipotent, omniscient. You can just throw out these words. That's it. You can't ask God does whatever God wants to do. That's what it means to be omnipotent. It's a similar sort of thing. So Gargi, don't ask too many questions. I don't know what you make of that, but that's a Upanishadic passage. So we'll, how are we doing for time? We've got 15 minutes and we'll take questions. I hope this is, hope you're, enchanted with these teachings. And definitely if you were, as I said, our canonical texts are the Gita and the Yoga Sutras, but anyone yogi, well, let me qualify that. Most yogis in India actually today are illiterate. Most of those sadhus you see with their loincloths and they're illiterate. But anyone that's a sort of any literate sadhu or seeker of truth in India would definitely be reading the Upanishads as Svadhyaya. The first verse of chapter 2 of Patanjali Svadhyaya, right? Kriya Yoga, Svadhyaya, Tapaha, Svadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, Dana, Kriya Yoga. And so Svadhyaya would be this. Would be the Upanishads, and then the Vedanta, which sets out to interpret them and systematize them. So if you're doing a Svadhyaya practice in pre-modern India, pre-Western exported yoga, it would absolutely involve the Upanishads. So bottom of page 41, this self, Ātman of yours, who is present within but is different from the earth, whom the earth does not know. Right? We're in these bodies and we know the body, but the body doesn't know us. Who is present within but is different from the earth, whom the earth does not know, whose body is the earth, and who controls the earth from within. He is the inner controller, the immortal, the one in the body. And then he goes on typical Upanishadic passage style, repeats the same teaching, but just changes instead of earth. Now he's got waters. The self of yours who is present within, but is different from the waters, whom the waters do not know, whose body is the waters, right? Isn't our body 90% water? Who controls the water from within. He is the inner controller, the immortal, the eternal. And again, same thing, fire, and again, then air, and he goes on all the way through. And in this very typical mode of pedagogy, right? Because you're listening to it and you're very grateful if it's repetitive. Have you ever sat in a class that's kind of challenging? You're very grateful when the teacher repeats. So then we get to the end. This self of yours, who is present within, but is different from all beings, whom all beings do not know, whose body is all beings, who controls all beings from within. He is the inner controller, the immortal. The consciousness is controlling the body, and it is immortal, it is Sat. All right? And again, then he goes through another list like this, but we'll just pick out one, which is kind of important because in the Western tradition, starting with Plato and right up until our Rutgers philosophy department, they have now, I'm in the religion department, but we have close relationships with the philosophy department. The philosophy, they've created a new rubric, a new little sort of entity within the philosophy department at Rutgers called the philosophy of religion. And some of those folks, they're arguing for a soul, but you can't use the language of soul in academia. That's theological language. So you use the language of substance dualism. That's philosophical language. There's a substance that's different from all other substances. Material substances like, atoms and particles and all of that, those are substances. But consciousness cannot be tied to any one of those or any combination of those. And therefore, the substance dualists argue that it must be tied to a different substance, right? Theologians will call it soul, fine. But you can't use that language in academia. Everyone will run away from you and will not talk to you because, you're bringing religion in. So you have to use the language of philosophy, substance dualism. So, and the substance dualism in the West tends to take the substance that's different, dual, that's different from matter, not as just consciousness, but as the mind. That's the difference between Indian dualism and Western dualism. Going back to Plato and Aristotle, Western dualism, the duality is between matter, all of that, and body on one side, but the soul on the other side is not just consciousness, but mind as well, right? And we know that Plato called it psyche. Not so the yoga. Yoga, there is consciousness on one side and matter on the other, but matter includes the mind. Mind is made of prakriti. Mind is made of the three gunas. And so on the other side, it's just consciousness itself, not mind stuff, not thought, and all of that. So I just want to read given that, and I just want to read this with you. The self of yours who is present within, but is different from the mind, whom the mind does not know. That's why you have the chitta-vritti nirodha it. If the mind could know it, why would you nirodha it? And besides, you couldn't nirodha if you were the mind. How could you nirodha yourself? You can't nirodha consciousness. You cannot you cannot nirodha her consciousness because consciousness is eternal. It can never be nirodha. But you can't. So therefore, if you can nirodha her something, it means it's not you. It's not eternal. You get that? You wouldn't be able to nirodha her the mind if that was really you, because you're eternal. So the self of yours who is present within, but is different from the mind, whom the mind does not know, whose body is the mind. The mind is like a body, a subtle body. Remember the sukshma sharira. Some of you have heard of. The Ātman has two bodies, the sthula sharira and the sukshma sharira. So the mind is a body in that sense. Later traditions are going to, elaborate on this. Who controls hearing from, where are we? Whose body is the mind, who controls the mind from within. He's the inner controller. He's the immortal. Oh, there we are, my friends. I'm running out of prana. 43. What are we going to do? Shall we take questions? No, I said I'd go to 8. I'll go to 8. Promise is a promise. Let's at least read one more. Fabulous. Verse 44. Then we'll take questions, and then we have a little kirtan, and then we go out of the sort of place of the, go out of a mental, intellectual place to a place of the heart and a devotional place. Nothing wrong with using the mind, by the way. Use anything you've got for liberation. You know, the great yogis were intellectuals as well, many of them. But they were not just trying to show off or display erudition. They were using their minds. In fact, that's what Jnana Yoga is. Jnana Yoga, technically, is not a Chitta Vritti Nirodha path. That's why sometimes they talk about DH, Dhyana Yoga. They talk about Dhyana Yoga, DH, Bhakti Yoga, and then Jnana Yoga, which is different from Dhyana, right? JN versus DH, because Jnana Yoga is not a Chitta Vritti Nirodha practice. How do you attain enlightenment then? You absorb the mind in the teachings of Ātman. You don't Nirodha it. Like in Bhakti, you don't Nirodha the mind. You absorb it in thick thoughts of Bhagavan, your beloved Ishvara. So Patanjali is a particular path, but don't think all yoga involves Nirodhaing the mind. Other paths use the mind in different ways. So Jnana Yoga uses the mind in absorbing the mind, not stilling it, not ceasing it, but activating it, but channeling and focusing exclusively on the sacred teachings and deep level type contemplation, but not in a Nirodha sort of way. Patanjali. He sees this, but he can't be seen. You can't see it with your eyes, but without consciousness, you wouldn't see anything. So he, in that sense, he's the ultimate perceiver, but he works through the instruments of sight. He hears, but he can't be heard. So we're used to this repetition here. He thinks, but he can't be thought of. Right? He perceives, but he can't be perceived. Besides him, though, there is no one who sees, no one who hears, no one. If the Atman leaves the body, then these instruments are useless. That's one of the arguments that they give. The dead body and the live body is identical. The senses are there. Everything's there, same molecular everything. So what's the difference then? There must be something missing, but all material ingredients are the same. So there must be a non-immaterial ingredient. That's one of the arguments. I don't know, you may think it's a good one or a bad one, but one of the arguments is what's the difference between a dead body and a live body? Because the bodies are identical. So therefore, the organs are there. They knew about subatomic particles. The particles are all there. Heat's still in the body. So if they're identical, but one is live and one is dead, then that distinction between life and death cannot be a material thing because the matter is exactly the same. So it must be a non-material thing. And then you make an inference that way, that non-material thing, then call it an Atman, call it whatever you want, call it a seer, but it is non-material. Because otherwise, the dead body and the live body are identical. So, besides him, there is no one who sees, no one who hears, no one who thinks, no one who perceives. It is this self of yours, this Atman, who is the inner controller, ultimately controls everything. Just like Brahman controls the entire universe, the Atman controls the body. The immortal. And then we have it again. All besides this is grief. Have right? First noble truth of Buddhism, four truths of Buddhism. All is grief, There's a cause, desire. There's a state beyond it, nirvana. And there's a means to get there, the marga, the Buddhist path. The Four Noble Truths. Patanjali uses exactly the same two words in 215. All is grief. And here we have it's the origin of this idea. All moksha traditions accept this. Jain, Hindu, Vaishnava, Shaiva, Tantra. Because if you weren't frustrated, why would you seek moksha? Means freedom. Freedom from what? Suffering. So that means that all material activities are considered to be ultimately suffering. There may be some differences in karma. We may have relatively better karma than somebody else, but we're all frustrated. We all get old. We all have to face that. Nobody wants that. So in that sort of larger way, all embodied beings are subject to suffering and anxiety and frustration. It doesn't have to be intense suffering like someone cuts your head off with a chainsaw. It doesn't have to be that kind of suffering. It just be existential kind of, I love this word malaise, French. It means ill at ease. Malaise. There's an existential kind of angst as a German word. Here, we got enough of the Sanskrit without throwing in all these other languages. Okay, so all besides this is grief. And perhaps we can leave it there. We'll do one more. How are we doing for time? We'll keep our word. I said we'll do 8. Satyam, And we would go, we'll go down here. Over here. Eleonora, can you remember what we got up to for next week, please? Would you mind? 8. He replied, that Gargi is the imperishable. And Brahmins refer to it like this, the Ātman. It's neither coarse nor, this is another nati example of nati, not this, not this, not this. Remember, not iti, not iti. Here's an actual example. It is neither coarse nor fine. It's neither short nor long. It's neither blood nor fat. It's without shadow or darkness, without air or space. It's without contact, has no taste or smell. It's without sight or hearing. It's without speech or mind. It's without energy, breath or mouth. It's beyond measure. There's nothing within it or outside of it. It does not eat anything and no one eats it. This is the imperishable. Another term for the Ātman, the Sat, the Sanatan, the Nitya, at whose command now we're talking about the big Ātman, the Brahman, at whose command the sun and the moon stand apart, creation. Okay. And we'll do one more and we will definitely call it a day or a night. With here, my friends, this is a nice way to part company. Without, this is being offered to you and me. Without knowing this imperishable, my friends, Gargi, even if a man were to make offerings, do all religious activities and rituals, offer sacrifice, perform tapas, all this other stuff, but without knowing the Ātman, even to do all of this in the world, even if you could put in 1,000 asanas, 1,000 headstands, I do all of this stuff, but without knowing the Ātman, for thousands of years, all that would come to naught at the moment of death. Pitiful is the man, Gargi, who departs from this world. Pitiful in the sense is worthy of pity, worthy of compassion. He blew it. Misuse the human form of life. You don't even know if you come back as a human, my friends. Eventually you will, but who knows when that will be. So that's worthy, from the sage's point of view, we're worthy of compassion. Pitiful is the man, Gargi, who departs from the world without knowing this imperishable. But a man who departs from the world after he has come to know this imperishable, he, Gargi, is the real Brahman, not some ritualistic, pompous, full of himself, priest who knows all the mantras and just has a big head. This is the imperishable Gargi, which sees but can't be seen, hears but can't be heard, and we're familiar with this now. Thinks that can't be thought, which perceives but can't be perceived. Besides this imperishable, there is no one that sees, no one that hears, no one that thinks. This is on this very imperishable Gargi, going back to the beginning of her question, what is space woven back and forth on? Remember the beginning of this whole thing on Brahman. And again, we'll go back to Vedanta Sutra 1.2. What is the definition of Brahman? That from which creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe emerge. It's the same thing here. It is the imperishable space, meaning space and all matter and all creation is woven back and forth. What do you think, my friends? Are you enjoying the Upanishads? Aren't they awesome?
Yes.
Well done.
Enjoying it?
Yes.
Immensely.
Fantastic. These have been around for millennia. Isn't that just special? Engaging these texts that have just been at the fountainhead of, we all know India is so rich in spirituality and wisdom. And then these texts have in many ways been at the fountainhead of all that. So we'll take questions for half an hour, and then we have a kirtan. Lakshmi there, Lakshmi Prabhu.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Jai Ho, Lakshmi. So we'll take some questions, Lakshmi. Is that all right? We don't.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe a half an hour, and then you'll be kind enough to lead us in a wonderful heart. Hopefully Krishna Kirtan, but whatever form of Ishvara you care to share with us, Lakshmi. Right, questions? Otherwise, we'll do Kirtan. We don't have to have questions. It's perfectly okay. You've got 6 more sessions, so don't think you won't get another chance. If you just want to chill and just go from that place of intense, we've been challenged. The sages are challenging us to not to waste our life, my friends.
Edwin, can you hear me?
Yes.
So the word, first of all, hi, it's Jill. Hi.
Hi, Jill.
Hi. So the word sat, I know I think I've asked you this before, but the word sat is isness or beingness, but we often hear it as the word truth. So is it just that the ultimate truth is isness, is beingness?
If something is really real, then it must always be real. And therefore it can never decompose or disintegrate. So this looks real, but one day it'd probably end up floating in the ocean and never decompose. But you know what I'm saying? So anything that like this, it has a reality in a certain sort of way, but eventually it will degenerate, it will decompose into its parts and into molecules and particles. So you can't, in that deep level where you can't say it's real. So something that's actually real can actually never change. Because it changes, then it was real, but now it's something else. Well, it's not real anymore, then it's changed. So milk changes into yogurt. Well, milk isn't real in that deep level sort of way because it's not milk anymore. So where's the reality of the milk? Then it's gone. So for something to be real, it has to be eternal. And therefore sat is, you can translate it as the real, and if something is real, it's true, tying it into the way you phrased it. If it's true, right? This is true now, but it's not going to be true in 10 years' time because it'll have dissolved. So it's a very limited sort of truth then, isn't it? If you're looking for a deep level, ongoing, permanent truth, it can never dissolve, can never change. It has to be eternal. So therefore, you can translate sat literally as ising. It's a present active participle of the root us to be. So technically it means being, but sometimes it's translated as truth because if something really is and keeps on, it can never not be true. Everything else cannot be true. This won't be true in 10 years or 100 years. So therefore, doesn't have that same level of truth. So if something is really, really true and always going to be true, then it can't change. So you can translate it as eternal. Sometimes you see sat translated as eternal. Sometimes the real. Sometimes what you just said, the truth. These are all synonyms. But technically, it means being. In other words, if you found it in literature, not in a Vedanta text, and then he would translate it as being. If you found it like, Ram, while being in the forest, made dinner for Sita, you found it in something like that, then you would translate it as being.
What about satyagraha? Is that in that sense it's a truth, the belief in satyagraha?
Satyagraha. That would be
Satyagraha.
Yeah. So that was the same kind of thing. So it's sat with a ya on the end. It's just a formation. It's an unusual formation. But the satya word satya is a ya suffix on the stem sat, and I can't remember the grammatical rule for how you add the ya suffix onto a present active participle. You don't care about that anyway. But yes, it's grounded in truth. Yes. It's grounded in the sense of sat, that which is real, that continues to be, that will always will be. Never not be, because then it's not really true then, is it? So its truth is not very, it doesn't endure very long.
So I have a question.
Satyagraha, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, I just got
Nancy
stuck
that I know
on
from New England.
No. There are a lot of Nancys.
Sure.
I just got stuck on the notion of a dead body being the same as a live one, because a dead body doesn't have breath. It's not breathing, and some things happen physically at the moment of death.
Yeah, but if an Ātman tradition would say whatever's happening, it's the minute the Ātman leaves, then those other things start happening. But they would say, okay, the breath is, the breath is still in the body, actually. There's still air in the body. There's still prana in the body, but it's a dead body. It's not that there's no air in the body. There's water in the body. There's fire. I mean, from an ancient Indian biology, and I think science would still say there's still air in the lungs.
But it's not moving.
Yes, it's not moving. That's the whole point. What's the mover?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Aristotle had a prime mover for the universe, but what's the mover for the little universe? It's something that was causing it to move. The argument is, well, everything else is the same. The air is still in there in some sort of way, but your point is they're not moving. Fine, that's exactly the point.
Okay.
What was it that was making it move 1 minute, an hour ago, and that somehow or other now there's no movement? What was the mover? What was causing that movement one instance, such that at a later instance that cause of movement is no longer there?
Mm-hmm.
And they would say that's the Ātman.
Thank you.
Hi, Edwin. This is Pasha.
Hi, Pasha.
I just wanted to ask, how do we best read the Upanishads, especially when we read passages that say the Ātman is the universe? Is it best to be read in a dualistic or non-dualistic way?
That's a Vedanta question, Pasha, and you cannot get the answer to that from the Upanishads, because in some parts of the Upanishads are clearly dualistic and explicitly dualistic, especially the later Shvetashvatara and even the earlier ones, and other Upanishads are monistic, and therefore the Upanishads allow both interpretation, and that's the very reason why you can have different Vedanta lineages. These Vedanta lineages, they're amazing, amazing Sanskritists, philosophers, theologians. They know that they knew Sanskrit from the age of 5. They speak Sanskrit, but they're able to read. Why is one lineage able to construe a dualistic metaphysics from the Upanishads and another one a non-dualistic? Because the Upanishads allow both. So then you're already pre-programmed to prioritize one aspect of the Upanishads and then give less weight to the other, or find secondary ways of accounting for the other way. And that's a story that we'll get into if we decide to do a Vedanta Sutra course. You won't get an answer to that from the Upanishads themselves. The Upanishads then have the commentaries. The commentators get into it, and they argue for dualism or non-dualism, not the Upanishads. Some places are monistic. We'll see next class, the next session, rivers merging into the ocean, very monistic. Other Upanishads, strong statements. Hara is distinct from the soul. There is a triad. There's the world, the soul, and Hara is the supreme, and eternally is supreme. So they are very strong dualistic passages. But let's leave that question for, you won't get an answer to the Upanishads. That's all we need to know now. And when you read the Upanishads, anyone reading the Upanishads over the last millennia and more, and even before Shankara is the oldest commentaries we have, but there were older ones, because Shankara himself talks about older commentaries and older teachers. And the Vedanta Sutras, which is, 3rd century, the Vedanta Sutras talk about older teachers. So this issue goes back to 2 millennia. And so typically, if you study the Upanishads and the Vedanta, you always study it with a commentary. And the commentary is going to give you a lens. So if you take an Advaita lens, you will see non-dualism everywhere in the Upanishads. But if you're trained and schooled and the dualist tradition, you take the dualist lens, you'll see it's obvious, it's dualism everywhere. Look. So the training in the lineages creates the samskaras, which form the lens through which you then read the Upanishads and the Vedanta. Now, if you don't want to get caught up in that, and then you want to step back and say, then you have to read both. And that's what we'll do if we do a Vedanta course. We'll look at a passage and we'll say, this is what Shankara says, this is what Ramanujan, and then you'll see, then you make up your mind. You can do that with the Gita, by the way, because Gita is a Vedanta text. And one day we'll do a workshop in the Gita. There's 3 texts that are canonical to the Vedanta tradition: Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, and the Gita. They call the Prasthana Traya, tricycle, Traya. So the Prasthana Traya, the Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutra, and the Gita. but we're not going to tackle that now, Pasha. That's something that's 2,000 years old and it's still going, it still hasn't been resolved. Well, good luck with that. But I think it's important that you take a position. Otherwise, if we're agnostic and we never commit to anything, well, is that going to be useless at the moment of death? Because these traditions all say wherever your mind is at the moment of death, Gita says it very clearly. That state of that mind will take you to your next destination. So if you're an agnostic mind, is that going to be helpful? Where's it going to take you? To another birth where you just then you're born as an agnostic, and then you either commit in the next life or you don't. So we'll take another question, my friends.
Edwin, this is John Gregory. Hi. And thanks, by the way. This Pasha may have jumped in on a thought that I had. And I don't want to have you repeat everything again. Would your explanation you just offered, Pasha, also explain perhaps the confusion I had that we went through tonight, where the Ātman is discussed as the personal, the yours, right? And then there is the spider that is shooting out webbing all over the place and is all encompassing. So your response to Pasha, would that be a fair response to sort of that confusion I was having as well? Because on the one hand, we have this very personal Ātman being described, and then we have this universal, all-encompassing Ātman. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. In later times, the Ātman is used, and the Gita pretty much uses it this way, for your little for the consciousness within all embodied beings, and Brahman in the cosmic sense, as that, and there's an intimate relationship. Some schools say it's one, absolutely one, and we just fractured off, and we have to, realize that we really are nothing other than that cosmic Brahman. So different schools say different things, but usually the term Ātman is going to be used for the little one. Let's call it little, meaning the one in every living entity, and Brahman is as defined in the Vedanta Sutra, the source of creation. However, in the Upanishads, they can be interchangeable. So sometimes the term Ātman is used for that big, for what is normally Brahman. Sometimes that can be called Ātman, as in the spider metaphor, right? And sometimes Brahman can be used for the self within. So they are mostly Brahman, cosmic, Ātman, little, but they can be and that's just the way the Upanishads are. They're not systematic.
So it's going to have to be contextual when you're reading it or going over.
Yes, and then sometimes it's obvious.
Yeah.
Like with the spider,
thank you.
With creation, clearly that's the big Brahman,
Thank you.
Exactly that, contextual. Shiva. He, him, his. He, him, his. Where's the she? Aren't you, where's the she, her, and that?
We could talk about that sometime, Edwin.
All right.
I find the concept of neti to be very fascinating. Before I heard about it in the Sanskrit language and the context of the Upanishads, I encountered a very similar concept studying Moses Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher of, I think maybe the 13th century. I'd have to double check, but much later.
4th century, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. Anyway, he tries to talk about God is not. There's a process of negation. And I'm wondering, is the neti concept like one of the earliest such, I don't know, it's kind of a methodology of, we can't know God with our finite minds, but we can know what God is not.
Yeah.
Like trying to talk about how God is unlimited in some way.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's one of the earliest techniques that we've encountered in any type of scripture, or if it has migrated into other cultures from the Upanishads, or if there's even earlier sources of that. Thank you.
I can't answer that. I don't know. I mean, it's the earliest in the Indian tradition. I'm not familiar with the early, because some of the Judaic texts go back to the 12th century. It could very well be the earliest, but I can't say that definitely. It definitely does sound like Maimonides, you're right. Do these concepts travel? Of course they do, but they don't necessarily leave a literary trail. I think the ancient world was far more interconnected than we can ever demonstrate. We don't have a literary trail. So it's possible on the one hand that ideas migrated, and it's possible also that the human mind comes up with the same thing independently. I mean, it seems a fairly obvious thing that if there's a God that's omniscient and omnipotent that you can't see, then it must be nati. It's not the tree out there. It's not the, so that doesn't seem like a really stunning theological observation that God's not, in one level is everything, but the other level is distinct from this, that, and the other. So, there's no reason why the human mind couldn't have, come up with that notion in two different traditions independently. But no one can answer that question. We don't have literary trails. We know the Greeks admired Indian philosophy. We know that there were motifs that circled back to the West. Of course, when Alexander came, these were a little bit more solid. They were preserved a little bit more robustly. But even that encounter, the books were lost. There were books written, they were lost, and then there was the Megasthenes book on India that was lost. And then all we have from that is the ancient historians quoting from it. So, there's very hard to, there's a philosopher in NYU who wrote a book on basically showing the commonalities between many, many Indian schools and Greek philosophers. It's a big, huge tome, and I forget what it's called. So people speculate, but you can't demonstrate any of that.
Fair enough. And it seems like such a universal concept that we would have arrived at perhaps simultaneously in different cultures throughout the world that, I'm sure it didn't just travel and influence other cultures alone.
Yeah.
And like you said, you can't determine that paper trail. So much has been lost. Thank you.
Yeah. We know Plotinus tried to get to India, joined the army, but they only got as far as Persia. He joined the army to get a free, hitchhike to India. I mean, definitely there were travelers. Definitely we know there were Indians, tradespeople in Alexandria and places, but it's very hard to reconstruct a philosophical paper trail. But it's very intriguing. Yeah. Any other questions, my friend? So is Pasha, is that your old hand that you still have up?
No, it's a renewed hand, if you don't mind.
And we'll make, we'll go till, I told Lakshmi 8:30. So we'll take it. Is anyone who hasn't asked a question want to ask a question? No? Go for it, Pasha.
Okay. Oh, I think Carl wants to ask a question.
Where's Carl?
I think Carl's on mute.
Okay, hi, I'm Carl. Question, the cover of the book, Olivelli's book, why this particular person from 1603 and not something more Vedic, like from 1500 BCE? Why this particular image on his book? Which I think is from a Mughal or Islam. But
I mean, I have no idea. Look at the image. My book's falling apart, so I don't have my front page anymore. But he has a yogi. What does he have on it?
Well, I know if it's a yogi. I question whether it's a yogi. I try to do a little research. He, apparently, very sympathetic to Krishna, the story of Krishna. But I believe he was a Mughal ruler, Muslim. I just wonder why the book wouldn't have something more Vedic. More.
Yeah, I have no idea, but you don't find any art that goes before. You don't find any art before 17th century. Then nothing's preserved. I mean, I don't know if there's the odd thing here or there, but when I was looking for the front cover of the Yoga Sutra book, I went to the Brooklyn Museum and they have an amazing collection of Indian art. Nothing before the 1700s. So I don't. And that would, of course, be in the Mughal period. So then if you're, so anyway, why did Olivelle choose that? I have no idea.
Just curious. Thank you.
You know what? You can drop him a line. Yeah. Just drop him a line. He's the University of Texas.
Yep.
Flatter him. Just say, oh, we're reading your book. Love your book. Da, 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 da. And then maybe that's not very that's not very sattvic. But anyway, just ask him if you're really interested, if you're curious.
Yeah, I'm interested. There may be a very good reason, which I'd like to know it. Thank you.
Yeah. So often
It might just be that it might just be that the publisher could get that for free. It might be simple like that. Yeah.
Sometimes it is like that. The publishers will. They don't like to spend a lot of money on the covers. They get very annoyed when authors, get too fussy with the cover. So they might just say, "Look, we've got this, and it's Indian." Sometimes it is like that. But ask him, Pasha.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about dogmatism and how. Well, I think what I thought about was the fact that you have this truth. And in the Upanishads, we were told we're supposed to think, reflect, and as you said earlier, not to be agnostic with things and take a step and commit to something. But once we commit to something and we sort of make our lenses small, isn't that sort of dogmatism, at least to ourselves in part? Because when someone asks, "What do you believe?" I'm like, "Oh, I think God is Shiva."
Yeah.
And how would that prevent me from saying, "Oh, yeah, I mean, it's cool that you think God is Vishnu, but I think it's the truth is Shiva." And wouldn't that make the truth subjective?
Well, yeah, belief is obviously, I don't know if the truth itself is subjective. I mean, there's a real world out there, right? So there's trees and stuff out there. That's not subjective. So there, at some point, there has to be some causal, there has to be some cause of everything, whether that's a Big Bang or whatever. Some causal mechanism, whether that's karma, whether it's gravity or whatever. So I would say, though, going back to the first part of your question, that it's an informed. Dogmatism means when you're not willing to listen to other points of view. Let's define the term a little bit here. Committing to something is one thing, but dogmatism is when you commit to something and your faith is weak and vulnerable, and you don't even want to engage other points of view because you're ultimately afraid. That's not desirable, and that's not spiritually healthy. But commitment, an informed commitment, when you've spent a period considering the options, you've sort of settled on something that, whatever reason, you meet a teacher, or whatever reason it may be, grace of Ishvara, grace of the Guru, somehow or other, you find a truth claim that just resonates with you on some level, and then you subject it to investigation and mana and all that, and then you commit to that. But you're not dogmatic, because you can still engage other views, you can have conversations, you can still have debates, as long as they're debates for the truth and not based on ego. There's different words for this in Sanskrit. In the debate tradition, there's vada, which when you're actually seeking truth, and there's tarka, when you're just trying to win from a place of ego. So committing to a truth, always knowing that yes, it's your belief, and other people believe just as fervently as you do. Being able to engage with other points of view, and then therefore you're constantly revisiting your truth. You're constantly submitting it in dialogue, in engagement. And you do that, but finally you get to a point where enough of all that. You've done all of that, and you think, I'm just going to go with my truth, and I'm not dogmatic. It's just that I'm, getting white hair. I mean, I don't need to spend my whole life reading everything and engaging. At some point, you do all of that, commit, and at some point, you just want to go deep, and you become more attracted to solitude, and just, really, okay, I put my money on it. I'm past the point of no return. I'm just going to go with this. And, I'm at that point. I have a library of 5,000 books. I'm just about to give the whole lot away, giving the whole collection away. And I'm just keeping my canonical texts. And because that's where I put my money. But I don't think that may make me dogmatic. I think, I still converse with everybody and still, and honor other points of view. That I think that's a big difference too. When you recognize the coherence of another point of view, you may prefer your point of view. You don't have to just kind of like in a panic, kind of, reject another point of view. You can honor that. You can honor it and see the coherence and see how there's an internal logic to it. It's just not your point of view. So I'm a Krishna Bhakta, but there's nothing about my tradition, much as I think it's rich and theologically sophisticated, I see the same richness and theological sophistication in Kashmir Shaivism and in all of these traditions. So you can commit to a truth, because otherwise you're not really on a path then. What are you doing then? You're jumping from one, not you, I mean, what is one doing if one's not on the path? Just jumping around, and I'm not sure that's going to be very helpful at the moment of death. So you can be on your path and totally committed to it, and in your heart you really feel that it is the most coherent, while at the same time recognizing the coherence and the value and the richness of other paths. So I wouldn't say any of that. Dogmatism is fanaticism, actually. If you're dogmatic, that's basically a fanatic. What's the difference? It's more or less synonymous. A dogmatist is just spouting truth and not willing to engage in any kind of probing or intellectual exchange. Well, that's sort of fanaticism.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, excuse me for my broken English. I do not speak very good English. Excuse me. But
what's your name, madam? Is this
Elena?
Hi, Elena.
Elena, yes.
Okay.
I would like to ask this. It's not clear. First of all, I'm enchanted about this reading, and the awareness there is no awareness after death. Okay, because the self doesn't know. I mean, it's itself. So there is no duality. So
Yes.
This is the point. But what about the consciousness? You said before that sort of amount of samskaras, the mind in the moment of death is direct to its own direction. Also, the incarnation and the after death will be particular for each samskaras. But what is the consciousness which is identified with the body during the lifetime? What is this point between the awareness, the consciousness, and the self? It's clear that the body is a corpse. The mind is a matter, because it's the sum of the bunch of the samskaras.
Yeah.
But what is the consciousness which identifies with the body during lifetime?
Well, it is that which, in that sense, everybody knows what it is, because we are all conscious. So
Yes.
that very sort of the qualia, the ability to experience. By the way, the words consciousness, awareness, it's all the same thing. So that consciousness is the ability to be conscious, to experience, qualia, phenomena. So that's consciousness. Now, consciousness can either be conscious of objects in the world, or it can, which is what yoga wants to do, and some jnana traditions remove consciousness from all of its awareness of the world, and return consciousness or develop a state of consciousness where consciousness, instead of flowing out into the mind and into the body and through all of those instruments into the world, consciousness is absorbed in its own nature. And Vedanta would say when it does that, it discovers that its own nature is blissful, that bliss that it's been seeking in the world out there, it's actually in its own nature. So that's that's another option. And the theistic traditions would say, actually, there's another option for consciousness. It can be absorbed in a distinct God, and liberation in those traditions, in the Krishna tradition, for example, involve an eternal experience of the souls being conscious exclusively of God, not absorbed in their own nature necessarily, but absorbed in this sort of separate, distinct nature of God. Now, that's something that we haven't encountered yet in the Upanishads. But if your question is what is consciousness, it's that raw ability to know. Sometimes it's even called jnana, that ability to be conscious of either oneself or one not self, another, whether that other is the world out there, whether the other is the mind, but the ability to know, to experience, these are all synonyms. You can't say much more than that. The Upanishads say, what can you say about it other than it's not this, it's not matter, it's not this, it's neti, it's not none of these other things. But we all know what it is in some sort of some sort of way. We don't know what it is and it's absorbed in its own nature, but we do know what consciousness is by dint of the very fact that we're conscious. And this is not conscious.
So the I am during while I still alive.
Yes.
This I am is referred to this body mind. It's okay. It's right. This is in this sense.
Yes, but these traditions are saying you can have that I am, and you can strip away that body mind I am. Just like some people would say, I am my shirt, right? I am, I look at it, I'm more dressed up. This is who I am. And then someone can say, don't be so superficial. That's just an external covering. So that I am, fairly easily, at least theoretically, we can theoretically understand that sense of I am can be separated from I am the body, because after all, in dream sleep, we experience that, a state of I am where you're not the body, you're in some other body. And in deep sleep, we have that experience of I am, which is not even the mind or the body. So we experience this all the time. So at least conceptually, it's coherent to say that there is a state of I amness, which is not a body I amness or a mind I amness, but some other kind of I amness. And that's where, as the Upanishads say, words turn back. Words turn back. They can't go there. So then another question might be, well, why do I want to go there if I can't even talk about it or even describe it? Well, the sages tell us that's blissful and eternal bliss, and that's the actual bliss that we've been seeking all along, except we're looking in the wrong place, where a consciousness is pouring out through the instruments and trying to find this bliss through the senses, the organs and the senses, and failing to do so. But later on the course, we'll see the 4 states of consciousness. 3 of them we know. There's bodily consciousness, we know that. There's dream consciousness, we know that, and that's not bodily consciousness, because when you're in a dream, you're in a different sort of body, not your gross body. So you experience that every night if you remember your dreams. And then third of all, there's deep sleep consciousness, so that you also experience that. So right there, you've had 3 modalities of consciousness. So therefore, it's not a huge leap of faith to consider the possibility, well, okay, is there a state of consciousness that's not a waking one, not a dreaming one, and not a deep sleep one, but it's just a state of pure consciousness itself? That doesn't seem like to be a huge conceptual leap to add this 4th possibility. And that's what yoga's claiming to give us a method. Therefore, it's not dogmatic. Another thing about dogma, going back to the last question, is dogma, there's no real way, there's no verification process. Yoga is claiming to give a verification, in that sense, it's kind of proto-scientific in a very rough sort of way, because you could disprove it. You're giving a method, very just blatantly given a method. What does Patanjali say? Chitta vritti nirodha tada, then you will experience. What will you expect? Tada means then what happens? That's verification. Tada kim bhavati drashtu sarupe vastana. I mean, that's a strong proposal that Patanjali wants us. There's no dogma. I mean, you could say, okay, it's dogmatic, but he's right in the beginning, he's saying, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, now verify it. Tada drashtu sarupe vastana. That's not dogmatic to me. Okay, friends, is that okay, Elena? I did the best I could. Yeah. Lakshmi Prabhu. Lakshmi Ji.
I'm here. Here I am. Ta-da.
Okay, I have to. If you speak, I can pin you. I'll put you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I'm going to replace
you.
For those of you who don't know, Lakshmi is an old friend of mine, great kirtan person, been doing kirtan for half a century. And that's his sadhana. That's his connection to his own Atman, but he's also a Bhakta, so he's more interested in the great Atman, the Paramatma, especially in the form of Sri Krishna. So his kirtans are kirtans offering to his beloved Ishtadeva, his beloved Lord Krishna. And Lakshmi, thank you so much. We haven't had much bhakti in the Upanishads, but we're grateful if you could take us to a place of bhakti through your kirtan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. As always, it's a real pleasure to hear you speak, to elaborate on the cryptic Upanishads and give some clarity to it. So thank you. I just want to do just a quick sound check, to see if anything. I'm using my ektar. This ektar, a very ancient instrument, very basic instrument. Ektar means one string, not sitar, 6 strings, but ektar, 1 string. And it provides a very kind of mystic background, simple, so that there's not a lot of interference coming in. Even music, although kirtan is a form of music meditation, there has to be a simplicity about it, because it's really not the music that we're meditating on. The music is to serve as a setting, much the same way as a gold ring serves as a setting for a valuable gem like emerald or sapphire, enhances its beauty. So the musicality of kirtan should not override the deep meditation on mantra. So we'll be chanting a couple of mantras. How long do you want me to go, Edwin? Do you do 15, 20 minutes?
I'm not muted. Lakshmi, can you hear me?
Yeah,
as long as you like. I'm gonna, as long as you want. It's up to you. Because folks can just log off. They're not. No one's compelled to stay.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, so
completely in your hands.
So we'll just go with it. The sound is okay. It's not breaking up or anything like that.
It's great, and I'll let you know if I'll let you know if it.
Yeah, give me a signal.
Thank you, Lakshmi. I'm gonna mute myself.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo 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 Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Gaura Premanandi, Hari Hari.
Lakshmi, thank you as always. It's been a long evening. Thank you so much. And we hope you'll join us again. And good night, everybody. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you all. And we'll see you next week. And now you know what's in store. And the mundaka, the kata, I think you're going to find that, you know, more user-friendly, more relatable. So we've got some great things ahead and more kirtan. Thank you again, Lakshmi. And I bid you all good night. Jai Shri Radhe.
Radhe Shyam.
Radhe Shyam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Lakshmi.